Chapter 721, Scene Aesolin. About half an hour later, Illidan and his team slowly approached the city gate. Ethan looked from a distance and saw Illidan taking the initiative to walk towards the moon guards guarding the city, starting to negotiate with them. Initially, the conversation between the two parties was relatively peaceful, but suddenly the atmosphere changed dramatically. Illidan's voice raised a few decibels as he issued a stern command to the moon guard. "Get out of the way for me." Illidan's voice was full of unquestionable authority. He tried to push away the moon guard in front of him, his face full of anger. "Blackund, don't you recognize me? I am Illidan Stormrage." The moon guard general guarding the city, Brittander, sneered and replied, "How could I not know you, a member of the Stormrage family and the younger brother of the Archdruid Malfurion? But even you, Illidan, cannot bring prisoners into Aesolin at will. According to the rules, you must hand over the prisoners to us." Brittander's tone was firm and unyielding. Veins popped up on Illidan's forehead, his body tense, and his muscles stood out like knotted tree roots. He stared angrily at Brittander and shouted, "Don't compare me to my brother who advocates Druid teachings. I have no interest in those trivial teachings. Please open your eyes and see clearly. I am Illidan Stormrage, not Malfurion." "Papa!" Illidan slapped his strong chest heavily, making a dull sound. His whole body was covered in green, evil patterns, like an awakened beast, full of power and wildness. He glared at Brittander and said in a louder voice, "I have received the gift from Lord Sargeras and am now your superior. I have the authority to bring my loot into the city. Let us through immediately." "I'm sorry, Illidan Stormrage," Brittander said with a sinister look on his face, shaking his head. "The palace has strict orders. Everyone else can bring loot into the city, except you. Please forgive me, but I can't obey." "You!" Illidan's eyes widened in fury. There was even an urge to act on his anger. In the past few days, Illidan had not captured prisoners. But all along, facing the dual pressure of Queen Ashara and the Burning Legion, Illidan, who had a bad temper and used any means to achieve his goals, chose to compromise and hand over the prisoners, even if he knew that those prisoners who were handed over would face the inevitable fate of death. However, Illidan is still Illidan. In his heart, Tehran's safety was more important than anything else. This time, he could no longer choose to compromise. So this time, he had to resist and fight for Tehran and for the persistence and love in his heart. Seeing that the negotiations were at an impasse, the evil patterns on Demon Hunter Illidan's body began to shine with a dazzling light, indicating the coming storm. "If you don't cherish the opportunity given to you, then don't blame my subordinates for being ruthless." Illidan's voice revealed a strong threat. Immediately afterward, his whole body was surrounded by evil flames, like a burning green fireball. The moon guards standing in front of him were ignited by the flames amid their screams, and instantly turned into ashes. Freed, Illidan took the opportunity to draw out two scimitars shaped like moon blades from his back. The blades were turned a sickly green by the power of evil energy, exuding a chilling light. Although his eyes were covered with a black cloth, they lit up with a clear green light at this moment, like two burning will-o'-the-wisps. Illidan suppressed his inner anger and warned in a low, threatening voice, "If Queen Ashara asks, I will explain it to her personally. Now I say it one last time. Get out of the way, or don't blame me for being ruthless. Don't even think about it." However, Brittander did not flinch. He took a few steps back with an ugly expression and hid in the protective circle of the moon guard. Then he raised his arms and ordered loudly, "Prepare to attack. Illidan wants to disobey." Her Majesty the Queen's order was clear. Take him to the palace. If he resists, life or death will be the outcome. As Brighthand's command echoed, the moon guards quickly assumed a fighting stance, preparing to launch a siege against Illidan. Illidan's patience had finally worn thin. He grinned, revealing his white teeth, and a ferocious smile spread across his face. He shouted, "You!" Before he finished speaking, he rushed towards the moon guard camp like a bolt of lightning. The scimitar in his hand flashed with a cold green light, cutting through the air with a sharp explosion. Under Ethan's close watch, Illidan bravely faced the siege of dozens of moon guards, launching a thrilling battle. The power of arcane magic and evil energy collided fiercely at the city gate, erupting with a deafening roar. The aftermath shook the city's defense barrier, triggering a series of continuous sirens, and the entire city seemed to tremble from the battle. "That's it now," Ethan murmured to himself, flapping his wings and flying in the direction of Isolin. When passing the city gate, Ethan looked at the furious Illidan with complicated eyes. It should be said that his purpose of taking refuge in Sargeras was indeed achieved. As an old acquaintance, Ethan could deeply feel that Illidan was no longer the same person as before. As a demon hunter, he was more powerful than when he was a mage, and he could still face the attacks of dozens of moon guards with ease. His figure shuttled quickly across the battlefield like a ghost, making him elusive. Although Illidan was temporarily unable to break through the strong defense of the Moon Guard and enter the city, he did not show any signs of defeat. He wielded the twin blades of Azeroth with such smooth movements that the Moon Guards cowered and did not dare to engage in close combat with him. At the same time, he skillfully used various evil spells to block and suppress the enemy's long-range spell attacks. Being a former member of the Moon Guard, Illidan knew his former colleagues well and had a clear understanding of their combat methods. He launched a series of rapid and violent attacks, forcing Brighthand, who was commanding from the center, to scramble and be overwhelmed. In this fierce battle, Illidan fully demonstrated the extraordinary strength and excellent tactical wisdom of the future savior appointed by Zera, the Mother of Light. Taking advantage of the raging battle at the city gate, Ethan calmly flew into the city. When he crossed the barrier, he inevitably triggered the alarm, but in this chaotic moment, no one could accurately identify the 10 alarms he triggered among the dense alarms. Zin Isolin, originally named Eludis, was specially renamed to Aisolin by the people of the Dark Knight Empire to pay tribute to their queen, Azshara. As the capital of the Dark Knight Empire, it was not only the center of politics and economy, but also a holy place for culture and arcane research. It was known as the Glory of Azshara. Its prosperity far exceeded the city of Salazar that Ethan had seen before. Ethan overlooked the city from the air. Magnificent buildings with high-class characteristics were scattered everywhere, and a wide canal flowed slowly around the city like a ribbon. Due to the undulating terrain of the city, a large number of water canals of varying heights were cleverly integrated into the urban design. Some canal sections even formed a spectacular sight of artificial waterfalls, with water pouring down and splashing like pearls falling on a jade plate. In the very center of the city lay the Well of Eternity, the treasure that supported the prosperity and development of the Night Elves. The water in this well always exuded a charming magical light, as if it were an eternal pearl. The majestic palace was built around it, and the two complemented each other, forming the most dazzling landmark of Zin Isolin. Ethan was flying in the air, looking far away. Ethan was immediately captivated by the vast Well of Eternity in the distance. Although he had glimpsed this well once during his soul journey, staring at this magnificent scene with his own eyes and feeling the surging arcane energy like a tide with his physical body, his heart still raced with excitement. "This doesn't look like a well, it's more like a small lake," Ethan muttered to himself. However, it was a pity that this small lake, known as the Pearl of the Dark Knight Empire, was now almost completely controlled by demons. As Ethan flew over Zin Ashari, he could clearly see that in the fell energy portal, next to the Well of Eternity, a steady stream of demons was pouring into the continent of Azeroth through the twisting nether. A large number of high elf mages surrounded the Well of Eternity, concentrating on casting spells and trying to expand the size of the portal to allow more and increasingly powerful demons to pass through. Their ultimate goal was to enable the fallen titan Sargeras to enter through this portal. Due to their frantic extraction of energy from the Well of Eternity, the once calm lake surface was now turbulent, and the blue-purple water was gradually turning green under the corruption of fell energy. Not far from the high elf mages, a blue-skinned Eridar sat leisurely on a luxurious chair, watching the portal slowly expand with satisfaction, a proud smile on his face. "Is that Archimonde?" Ethan stared at the Eridar, who was the same size as an ordinary night elf, and felt an inexplicable nervousness in his heart. After all, Archimonde was a demigod whose strength far surpassed that of Voldemort. Ethan subconsciously slowed his progress and finally landed gently on the domed roof of a high-rise building. Chapter 7-22, Finger of Death. Entering the city of Zin-Ashari, Ethan no longer felt the need to rush. Raptors were usually absent from this city. To avoid drawing unnecessary attention and suspicion, he used his transformation ability, changing from the conspicuous form of a flying eagle into an ordinary crow, a secondary product of his Storm Crow transformation ability. Ethan perched on a rooftop, overlooking the entire city, silently observing his surroundings. He soon noticed an important detail. Queen Ashara did not fully trust the Legion. This was evident from the distribution of demons and highborn in the palace. Although the queen allocated the side hall near the Well of Eternity to the demons, Ashara's royal guards still guarded the road leading to the core area of the palace and refused to yield. The demons, led by Archimonde, also had a tacit understanding and did not attempt to breach this forbidden area. This phenomenon made Ethan realize that the Burning Legion still needed Queen Ashara's support until it could use the endless energy of the Well of Eternity to build a passage sufficient for Sargeras to descend. At the same time, the Queen's own strength was quite formidable. With the blessing of the Well of Eternity's magic, even the 10-dimensionally arrogant Archimonde was unwilling to engage in a direct conflict with her. The distinct layout of forces in the palace made Ethan fall into deep contemplation. He began to outline a preliminary plan in his mind, thinking about how to infiltrate this heavily defended palace. However, as the most heavily defended mortal building in Azeroth, sneaking in unnoticed would not be easy. Ethan knew he needed to refine his plan more carefully. No matter what, I have to find a suitable place to stay first, Ethan thought to himself. Flying in the sky in the form of a crow is not a long-term solution. I can't really imitate a crow's living habits and rely on eating insects. With that thought, Ethan fluttered his wings and took off again, surveying Zin-Ashari's layout from the air. The city was arranged in a circle, with the royal palace centered on the Well of Eternity located in the innermost circle, like stars surrounding the moon. The palace was surrounded by a large number of gorgeous and majestic single-family buildings. Ethan could even see many private gardens enclosed by high walls, which must be the residences of the noble upper elves. Further outside was the area where the canal flowed. Various shops lined the river, with all kinds of signboards hanging. This should have been a bustling commercial street, but it seemed a little deserted at this time. Only a few highborn were shopping arrogantly along the way, their noses seemingly turned up to the sky. In the center of the commercial streets surrounding the canal, a magnificent public square was built. In the center of the square stood a silver statue of Queen Ashara. Her beautiful face shone in the sun, allowing both civilians and nobles to admire the queen's grace. Outside the business district was the outermost civilian area of the city, where Ethan was currently located. Although the buildings here were not as tall and magnificent as those in the inner circle, they were still unique. The distinctive architectural style of the Night Elves made these buildings, even those built by civilians, exude a different kind of beauty. Even the low-rise houses looked particularly exquisite. Ethan walked carefully through this area, determined to avoid places frequented by highborn elves. Their detection magic was diverse and difficult to guard against. If one of them saw through his disguise, all his efforts would be wasted. Compared to the prosperous aristocratic and commercial areas, the outer civilian area seemed a bit deserted and lonely. Occasionally, civilians working outside hurried by, adding to the sense of isolation. In the past, most people lowered their heads and looked solemn. Everyone glanced around nervously, fearing that a ruthless demon might suddenly appear and kill them. Such worries are commonplace in Zin-Ashari today. Although the demons cannot enter the core area of the noble district and the royal palace, they enjoy great authority under the protection of Queen Ashara by virtue of their status as god envoys. Except for a few confidential places, the city has almost opened its doors to them. The upper elves turn a blind eye to the suffering of the common people and ignore the random killing of civilians by demons. This is why the class conflict between them and the common people has deepened. Outside the royal palace, an aristocratic area, where people are singing and dancing, the prosperous Zin Isolin has shown signs of decline. Although the commercial street is still bustling, the sparse shops and hurried passers-by indicate that the city's former glory is quietly fading away. The desolation of the civilian areas has added to the city's decline. Ethan searched in the civilian area and quickly located a small and quiet Elune temple. He slowly lowered his flight altitude and prepared to land there, intending to reveal his identity to the local Sisters of Elune and seek their help. The members of the Sisterhood of Elune are devout guardians of Elune's faith. Ethan firmly believed that once they knew his purpose and understood his identity as a favored one, they would definitely lend a helping hand and provide him with valuable information and assistance. Just as Ethan spread his wings and flew towards the Temple of Elune, the Well of Eternity in the distance suddenly shot out a green beam of light, pointing directly at him. The beam was as sudden as a ghost, catching him off guard. The moment he was locked by the beam, Ethan immediately felt an unprecedented crisis, and all the feathers on his body became tense. He suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of the Well of Eternity. There, he saw a pair of cold and ruthless green eyes staring at him, and the other person's fingers still retained the faint light after releasing the spell. Sure enough, even such a disguise cannot hide from Archimonde's eyes. Ethan sighed inwardly, but he did not show the slightest panic. Despite being locked by such powerful magic, and despite all the sensations in his body reminding him of the dangerous attacks he faced, Ethan remained calm and composed. He just continued to fly forward, as if he were really just an ordinary crow, soaring leisurely in the sky without noticing the fatal light beam. Bah! A sharp sound broke through the air, and that terrible blow hit the little crow head-on. It didn't even have the slightest chance to struggle and lost its life on the spot. Its body was seen spinning in the air, falling feebly, and finally hitting the ground with a pop, turning into a shriveled corpse. The evil energy beam that cut through the sky was so powerful that it even penetrated a huge hole in the clouds. The full moon, which was originally obscured by clouds, revealed half of its true appearance, and the bright moonlight fell on the earth. However, the sudden appearance of the moonlight caused a large number of civilians in the city of Zin Isolin to panic. They looked up and saw the destructive power contained in the evil energy beam lingering in the air for a long time, which was terrifying. Many civilians could not wait to turn around and hide at home immediately, closing their doors and windows tightly and never going out again. The pale green evil energy is a symbol of demonic power. For the night elf civilians who have suffered massacres by demons, they are extremely sensitive to this power. At this moment, their hearts were filled with fear and uneasiness, fearing that the demons would cause trouble again and bring disaster to them. As a result, the whole city fell into panic again, and the streets were deserted. The few people remaining made the scene even more desolate. The shriveled crow corpse and the lingering malevolent aura below served as stark reminders that the threat of demons still loomed. Meanwhile, at the center of the dispute at the city gate, Illidan's expression suddenly changed as he was causing a commotion. Alas! As expected, Archimonde has discovered us, he murmured to himself, staring at the green afterglow in the distance that had not yet completely dissipated. At this moment, he had completely overpowered the Moon Guards and taken control of the situation. The Moon Guards were retreating steadily in the face of his power. More than half of them had fallen at his feet, including Brittander, who had always been a thorn in his side. Illidan raised his head slightly, glancing once more at the aftermath of the Finger of Death, and couldn't help but sigh, feeling a mix of emotions. It's such a pity, he lamented in a low voice, that this druid with so much potential ended up like this. As he thought about it, he recalled the identity of Ethan's love rival. What would Malfurion's reaction be if he found out? He wondered. Shaking his head to dispel these distracting thoughts, his eyes gradually became resolute. It seems that the task of saving Tyrande can only be completed by myself, he said to himself. After I return, I must find a way to discover where Tyrande is being held. With that, he struck down the last enemy with a single blow and turned to look at the palace, shrouded in the dim light of the Well of Eternity. Chapter 723. Attention from all parties. At the same time, Queen Ashara was quietly admiring the flowers in the palace garden. Her eyes inadvertently caught sight of Archimonde's cutting through the sky. The green beam was so powerful and particularly dazzling in the night sky. The headmaid, Vashj, stood aside with a trace of worry on her face. She reminded in a low voice, "Your Majesty the Queen, Archimonde." "Vashj, I know what you are worried about." Ashara raised her hand gently, interrupting Vashji's unspoken words. "Archimonde's strength is indeed beyond our expectations, but he has not yet let us down. We are helpless." As she said that, Ashara picked up the exquisite teacup on the table and took a sip. An indifferent smile appeared on her face. "Let's not concern ourselves with this for the moment. I am more interested in the situation with Tyrande. Has she changed her mind?" "Unfortunately, no." Upon hearing this, Vashj's eyes flashed with a cold light, but her voice remained calm. Elune's protection seems to still be working, and Tyrande's attitude remains resolute. She has not softened at all. "She even refused our carefully prepared delicacies from the 610 office," Vashj continued. "She relies on a small amount of food from her own magic package to sustain herself." "Haha." Ashara chuckled and gently lifted Vashj's chin with her long, white fingers. There was a joking expression on her beautiful face. "Vashj, do you really think your little tricks can be hidden from me? You must have tampered with the food given to Tyrande. I've seen through this little trick a long time ago. Queen, please listen to my explanation." Upon hearing this, Vashj's face suddenly changed. She was eager to explain. Okay, no more words." Ashara interrupted her, letting go of Vashj's chin and waving her hand lazily. "I have no interest in knowing about the fights and calculations between you. What I care about is only the end result." She paused and continued. "As long as Tyrande is willing to give up serving Elune and follow me instead, I can forget her past stance." Ashara looked up at the sky. The bright moon was hiding behind the clouds, only showing half of her shy face. The corner of her mouth raised a playful arc. "Imagine what an exciting scene it will be when the god's followers turn to serve me." This is Ashara, the light of light, so arrogant that she even tries to rival Elune. Although Vashj still harbored deep hostility towards Tyrande, seeing the expectant expression on Ashara's face, she could only twitch the corners of her mouth and echo in a low voice against her will. "Yes, Your Majesty. Your glory will surpass the moon god Elune and shine on the entire Azeroth." Ashara caught Vashj's unwilling look from the corner of her eye, and a playful smile flashed in her eyes. "Keep looking after her, Vashj. Elune's protection cannot last forever. I'm curious how long she can hold on after losing Elune's care." At the edge of the main battlefield east of Zin Ashari, Malfurion, who was about to lead a small number of elites to launch a feint attack on the flank of the Burning Legion, suddenly stopped. His eyes were solemn, as if he felt some uneasy omen. The feint attack team that followed, including the human mage Ronan and the orc warrior Brox, also stopped simultaneously. They looked up at the sky with a look of surprise on their faces. The scene there made them unable to help but be moved. A striking, evil energy beam pierced the sky, and its green light was particularly dazzling in the night sky. The terrifying power contained in the beam seemed capable of destroying everything, making Malfurion purse his lips unconsciously. The uneasiness in his heart surged like a tide, but he tried to suppress it. Could it be? A trace of doubt flashed through Malfurion's mind, but he quickly interrupted his thoughts. "No, I have to believe Ethan." Before time travel, Brox had actually just returned from the Battle of Hyjal. In this war, he had slain many demons and fought against Archimonde alongside his allies. This is why the Bronze Dragon King Nosdormu chose him as the hero and time travel candidate. As an expert in killing demons, he could provide invaluable advice to the Night Elves, who had never encountered demons in the War of the Ancients. Yet, even this brave old orc warrior unconsciously clenched the oak battle axe in his hand, fear evident in his eyes. "I have seen that evil energy beam representing destruction on Mount Hyjal," he whispered in Ronan's ear. "That is Archimonde's signature skill, Finger of Death." Upon hearing this, Ronan's expression grew more solemn. He nodded and said to Brox, "It's truly admirable that you could defeat such a terrifying enemy. Unfortunately, I was not there during the Battle of Hyjal and did not have the opportunity to fight alongside you." Brox glanced secretly at the young Malfurion beside him, shook his head gently, and said, "No, in that thrilling battle, no one could resist Archimonde's overwhelming power. We tried our best, but we could only barely stop the main force of the Burning Legion." His words revealed endless vicissitudes and helplessness, as if he had returned to those war-torn years. In the end, it was the Night Elves who heroically sacrificed their immortality and detonated the vast power contained in the world tree Nordrassil so that they could kill the terrifying demon leader. Brox spoke this bitter truth behind Malfurion's back. When Malfurion gathered his thoughts and prepared to lead the Feint attack team on their journey again, Maiev, who had originally planned to join the Feint attack, had to stay in the camp and undertake a task completely different from her usual personality and identity, taking care of others. In the camp of the Sisters of Elune, within a spacious independent tent, weak coughing sounds could be heard from time to time. The sound was frail and old, as desolate as fallen autumn leaves. Maiev looked worriedly at the woman lying on the bed, her face as pale as winter snowflakes. Several high-ranking priests of the sisterhood gathered around, clasping their hands together and concentrating on using magic to relieve the woman's pain and bring hope of healing. "Don't waste any more energy, my sisters," the woman on the bed said with a bitter smile, shaking her head. Although the pain was constantly eroding her will, her voice still maintained its usual gentleness. "What I have suffered is not a simple injury, but an overdraft of the body. This is not a problem that ordinary healing spells can solve." "But, High Priest," a priest spoke anxiously, but was gently interrupted by the woman. "Okay," High Priest Dejana, who had just woken up, said in a weak voice, waving her hands. "You go out first. I have important things to discuss with Maiev alone." At this time, Maiev quietly leaned against the corner of the tent, crossing her arms over her chest. As a combat priest, she had profound knowledge in 18 kinds of weapons and combat spells, and had even begun to explore the dark side of the power of the moon god. However, she had no ability in healing spells, so in this situation, she could only watch from the side. But when she heard the high priest's words, her eyes flashed, and she seemed to understand something. When the other high-ranking priests turned their heads in confusion, she nodded slightly to express her agreement with the high priest's decision. "Go," she said softly. "Onhara still needs your help. Please do your best to heal him. As one of the demigods believed by the Tauren, his existence is of great importance to our communication with the Tauren allies." "As you command, High Priest and Priest Maiev," the high-ranking priests responded in unison. "The light of Elune will always shine on you." When greeting, these high-ranking priests even placed Maiev and High Priest Dejana side by side, showing their respect. After speaking, they turned around and left the tent. As the high-ranking priests departed, the tent fell into a brief silence, interrupted only by the occasional shouts from the military camp outside. "Hey," Dejana sighed, observing Maiev's stubborn and determined expression. She understood that during her coma, this loyal priestess had obviously learned some unsettling truths. Gently patting the edge of the bed, Dejana offered a loving and caring smile. "Maiev," the high priest said softly, "come and sit down. I know you are full of doubts and dissatisfaction. While we still have some time, I will do my best to answer your questions. Please listen to me patiently." Chapter 24. This is my struggle to survive. At this moment, a strange atmosphere filled the streets of Aislinn. The eyes that were originally focused on the place where the finger of death had just struck gradually dispersed, and a silent storm seemed to have subsided. Out of sight of everyone, a little snake quietly confided in the news and secretly rejoiced. "Fortunately, I was prepared and foresaw the risk of being discovered by Archimonde." The little snake muttered to itself, with a hint of pride and fear in its voice. Yes, in fact, the crow just killed in front of everyone was merely a stand-in carefully prepared by Ethan. But now, this seemingly insignificant little snake was his true form. From the moment he stepped into Aislinn, Ethan had been fully prepared for possible crises. He did not underestimate Archimond, the demon leader. On the contrary, he always tried to overestimate his level. Ethan knew very well that facing a demon leader like Archimond, any slight misstep or carelessness could result in a heavy price. On the distant planet Argus, the Eridar race gave birth to 3 giants of the glorious planet, Archimond being one of them. At that time, the arcane civilization of the Eridar people had reached its peak. They used the power of arcane magic to create countless miracles. Archimond was even more outstanding among them, having explored deeply in the field of arcane magic. He became an unrivaled mage hundreds of years ago. However, when the Dark Titan Sargeras reached out to Archimond, the former Eridar giant embarked on the road to becoming a demon. Although the source of his power changed from arcane magic to unstable evil energy, this did not weaken his strength, but made him stronger. Based on this, Ethan guessed that even after becoming the Demon Lord, Archimond had been obsessed with conquering world after world. Relying on the accumulation during the Eridar Big Three, this demon giant must have mastered some things that he didn't know, such as detecting magic. Therefore, from the very beginning, Ethan was prepared to deal with Archimond's sudden attack. Facing an enemy like Archimond, any slightest relaxation could cost him his life. In fact, the second before Archimonde's finger of death locked onto its target, Ethan transformed into a crow. But when he found out that he was targeted, Ethan did not panic. While he was pretending to be a crow, he secretly began to prepare a counterattack spell. Just as the fatal finger was about to strike, Ethan quickly activated his spell. Deathproof Barrier, Kingkar Castling, Psychic Obscuration. Long before entering the city, Ethan had prepared this series of spells and stored them in the spell sequence, ready to be triggered at any time. And at this moment, this series of spells were activated in an instant, and the chain spells allowed Ethan to escape from being hit by 10 rounds of demigod-level Fingers of Death within a short time. Therefore, when the Finger of Death suddenly came, it did not completely touch Ethan's body. What was killed by this finger was just an unlucky crow substitute he found. Just in case, Ethan cleverly injected his own power into the crow, giving it a breath similar to his in a short period of time, thus successfully deceiving Archimond and many demons. After this series of exquisite operations, Ethan successfully escaped into the depths of Aesilin and disappeared from the sight of the demons. His plan was successful. Not only did he escape the clutches of death, but he also gained valuable time and opportunities for subsequent actions. Ethan had no doubts about Archimond's abilities, but he also had firm confidence in his own stealth skills. As a master of arcane magic, he knew the fundamental principles of prophecy magic very well. Any tracking or detection spell requires some kind of clue or condition to guide it. Just like the reason why he was able to detect Illidan's whereabouts from a long distance, all relied on his understanding of Illidan's intelligence, his connection with Illy, Danaz. A spellcaster, Ethan, carried daily necessities used by Illidan as ritual props. This principle is similar to using specific keywords in a search engine. The more targeted the keywords, the fewer and more precise the search results, allowing you to locate the information you need faster. Conversely, vague information results in a haystack of search results, making it difficult to find what you're looking for. Ethan cleverly used a stand-in. He knew this substitute was only a temporary cover, and the aura he imbued in it wouldn't last long. A devil proficient in magic could easily see through it upon closer inspection. This lie would be exposed sooner or later. However, this didn't concern him. Archimond's understanding of Ethan was far less than Ethan's understanding of Illidan. No matter how much Archimond used magic to communicate with gods, he wasn't the real god of prophecy, and couldn't violate the basic principles of the world to forcibly retrieve Ethan's traces. Archimond detected Ethan's identity mainly because of the strange feeling Ethan experienced when he entered Aesilin from the outside world. But as time passed, Ethan would become more comfortable in Aesilin, and this strange feeling would gradually dissipate, like 10 drops of water blending into the vast ocean. By that time, even someone as powerful as Archimond would have difficulty tracking him. The mission of the substitute was to buy this time. Suddenly, Ethan, in his snake form, used his keen senses to capture the crow that seemed to be searching for him. Without hesitation, he ignored the filth and stench of the sewer and went straight in. The dark sewer, avoided by others, was the safest haven for Ethan to continue hiding. "I don't believe it. How could you jump into the sewer to find me?" Ethan muttered to himself with a sly smile. Before entering the sewer, he took one last look in the direction of the Well of Eternity, and then his snake form gradually disappeared into the darkness. For the next 2 or 3 days, Ethan hid deep in the sewers, like the most cunning assassin, using the darkness to cleverly cover his whereabouts. His purpose was not only to confuse his pursuers, but also to buy himself time to recover from his injuries. Archimond's Finger of Death was no ordinary spell, and its power still made Ethan fearful. Even though he was prepared for this fatal spell directed at the soul, he couldn't completely withstand its impact. The cold force of death clung to his wound, making it difficult to heal. Every time he felt the force raging in the wound, it was a merciless reminder of his brush with death. Ethan wasn't incapable of healing himself. He wasn't an ordinary mage lacking treatment methods. He had also practiced druid magic and had many ways to be favored by the goddess. However, rejuvenation elixirs alone weren't enough. While they could make the body heal quickly, the key to treating this kind of wound was to dispel the power of death. To completely dispel this evil force, Ethan had several options. He could cast high-level purification spells, transform into a phoenix and use sacred flames to remove the wounds, or even ask the goddess directly for help. However, to remain hidden and avoid attracting unnecessary attention, Ethan chose silence and patience. He knew that most of the healing spells he mastered were high-level natural spells, which would produce strong energy fluctuations when cast. This would undoubtedly draw unwanted attention. It would be fine if it were arcane magic or dark magic, but this is a natural spell that requires harnessing the power of nature. In AI, a place teeming with arcane magic and dark energy, Ethan Selene stood out too much, so he had to be extra cautious. On the other hand, choosing to become a phoenix was akin to walking into a trap. In a fierce battle with Deathwing in the past, Ethan had once displayed astonishing power in his phoenix form. He had used Neltharion's lack of understanding of the phoenix to defeat the demigod dragon with quasi-legendary strength. That battle undoubtedly left an indelible impression on Archimond and the other demons who were watching. Ethan firmly believed that they must now be taking strict precautions against his phoenix form. Asking the goddess for help was out of the question. It would be like lighting a lamp in the darkness. Although the power of the moon god was extremely potent, it was difficult for it to directly act on the main material plane. Once the power of the moon god descended, it would be like shining a dazzling spotlight on Ethan's head, not only exposing his position, but also making him a target of public criticism, with nowhere to escape. Therefore, he resolutely abandoned this option. Instead, he allowed the wound to slowly fester in the darkness, using low-level, inferior restoration technique and rejuvenation technique to eliminate the power of death bit by bit. The process was long and painful, but his tenacity and perseverance allowed him to endure. However, this suffering also worsened Ethan's condition. If he were to revert to his human form now, he would find his face as pale as paper, his expression full of exhaustion and weakness. This was the price he had to pay to survive. This was his struggle to stay alive. Chapter 725, Adopted. Ethan. 3 days passed slowly. According to Ethan's calculations, Archimond should no longer be able to directly locate his position, so he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he knew that he could not afford to be complacent. His goal was to rescue Tyrande from the heavily defended Isolin, and for that, he needed a capable accomplice. Elun's temple was no longer a viable option, as he had been attacked near there before. If the demons discovered that the dead person was just a stand-in, it would become a key patrol area. Ethan immediately thought of Dathramar Sunstrider. The name Dathramar Sunstrider came to his mind because the Sunstrider family, a prominent family among the Upper Elves, had the right to enter and exit areas where Tyrande might be imprisoned. In the original work, Dathramar had also participated in the action of rescuing the priestess. In terms of both ability and willingness, the Sunstrider family was his best choice. The only problem was that he didn't know where the Sunstrider family was located. Even using prophecy spells was not easy in this case. For prophecy spells to be more effective, he needed more specific information. However, Ethan's knowledge of the Sunstriders was limited to the descriptions in the original novels. He had never met any member of the Sunstrider family in person, let alone had an in-depth relationship with them. Just as it was difficult for Archimonde to locate him using prophecy spells, it was also extremely difficult for Ethan to locate the Sunstrider family through prophecy spells. But no matter how difficult it was, he had to try. Ethan didn't dare to go back to the surface to ask passers-by. He had no other choice but to use magic to divine. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to use high-level factory. He felt his magic power surge out of his body, connecting to Akasha's records, penetrating the barriers of time and space to find the target. After countless attempts and efforts, Ethan finally managed to get an approximate location. Following the undercurrent of the sewer, Ethan headed in the vague direction he had divined. However, when he arrived at his destination, the sight before him shocked him, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. "Damn it," he cursed in a low voice. "The gap between the night elf nobles and the common people is so deep, even the sewers are not the same." He looked at the sealed wall in front of him, anger burning in his heart. "You really deserve to be overthrown. How can it be surprising that such class separation doesn't cause turmoil?" Complaining wouldn't change anything. Ethan knew he couldn't stay there for long, so he had to risk leaving the sewers and returning to the surface. He transformed into a small crow, spread his wings, and continued to fly in the direction of the Sunstrider family. The night was as dark as ink, and the stars were sparse. Relying on his extraordinary perception abilities, Ethan shuttled through the darkness like a ghost, carefully avoiding everyone's sight and not attracting any attention. During the flight, he noticed that the number of doomsday guards and magic bats in the sky had increased significantly, becoming denser than a few days ago. These demonic creatures ferociously killed any birds flying over Iceland, as if they wanted to turn the sky into a deathly silence. Without being able to locate Ethan, the incompetent and furious demons chose to kill any birds, leaving Ethan no way to hide himself by transforming into one. "It seems that my double has been discovered by them," Ethan thought to himself, shaking his head. He knew he had to be more careful and not be negligent in the slightest. Finally, he arrived at the area where the Sunstrider family was suspected to be. However, facing the daunting task ahead, he knew this was just the beginning. In this intricate building and courtyard, Ethan felt a little confused. He wandered around for a long time, but could not find where the Sunchaser's courtyard was. As time passed, the night gradually faded away, and the sky began to lighten. Ethan's heart tightened, knowing that dawn was approaching, and it would be much harder for him to hide during the day. He quickly looked around and selected a dense bush in an exquisite-looking courtyard. He hid himself there, preparing to rest for a while. The erosion of the power of death at his wound still made him feel weak. He closed his eyes and tried to regain some strength. It didn't take long for fatigue to overwhelm him, and he fell into a deep sleep. The afterglow of the setting sun fell on the quiet courtyard, and the golden light filtered through the shade of the trees and windows, casting mottled patterns on Ethan's face. The call of his biological clock made him slowly open his eyes. Ah! The moment he woke up, he felt a strange tightness in his chest and abdomen, as if he was being restrained by something, which made him break out in a cold sweat. "Damn it, the weakness caused by this wound is affecting my alertness," he thought to himself. "Am I caught?" He maintained a stiff lying posture, not daring to move rashly. He just raised his head blankly and looked around. The surrounding scenery gradually came into view, but no enemies were found. "Where am I?" And Ethan lowered his head and began to examine his body. He discovered that the feeling of restraint did not come from ropes. On the contrary, he could see that his body was carefully bandaged, and there was a strong smell of medicine emanating from the bandages. Lowering his head and observing his body, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. The feeling of restraint was not due to being tied up with ropes. It was the bandages and the medicinal smell. It seems that someone discovered me, mistakenly thought I was just an ordinary crow, and then rescued me, he guessed, with a complicated emotion in his heart. By carefully observing the furnishings in the room, Ethan preliminarily deduced that the person who saved his life must have a distinguished background and was not a maid, but a true upper elf. This spacious room, covering an area of at least 200 square meters, was decorated in an extremely luxurious style. A soft pink wool carpet covered the entire floor, making it feel like walking on clouds. On an exquisite single bed, a purple gauze curtain was gently draped, exuding a light lavender fragrance that was intoxicating. In the corner of the room, a magic broom was sweeping the floor on its own, while on the desk, an arcane quill was writing something quickly. The developed arcane civilization and luxurious lifestyle were evident. These luxurious furnishings and magical items were definitely not available to ordinary civilians. Judging from the color and style of various furniture in the room, Ethan guessed that the owner of this room was likely a woman. Of course, there was also a small possibility that this was a man who considered himself to be a woman. The degree of opulence in the life of the upper elves reminded Ethan of the nobles in human history. There might be such people among the upper elves as well. At this time, the owner of the room was not present, and the injured Ethan was carefully placed on the windowsill where he could directly bathe in the moonlight. The person who rescued him was very considerate and had placed a soft cushion under him so that he could lie down comfortably. Ethan thought to himself, the status of the master here must be high if they can take me in when the Burning Legion is killing birds. I should be. Ethan decided to stay put and rest, lying on the soft cushion like a salted fish, quietly recovering his strength. He also kept his ears alert for any movement outside the room. His plan was simple: remain here and wait patiently for the return of the room's owner. He hoped to gather useful information from the owner's daily life and conversations to better understand the current situation. Fortunately, he didn't have to wait long. About 10 minutes later, Ethan's psychic powers keenly detected faint movements outside the thick mahogany door. Soft and steady footsteps gradually approached. Each step was precise and uniform, revealing an innate elegance and calmness. The owner of the footsteps had obviously undergone strict etiquette training. Ethan immediately deduced that the person meeting these conditions was likely the owner of the room. The following conversation confirmed Ethan's suspicion. Soon, a vague and distorted voice came from outside the door, saying respectfully, "Miss, welcome back." Another young and indifferent female voice replied, "Well, what's the next reservation?" Although her voice was calm, it carried an innate nobility to Ethan's ears. "A distinguished guest is coming at 3 o'clock in the evening. I hope you can go to the living room to receive him," the first voice said again, still full of respect. The second female voice sighed softly and replied, "Ah, I remembered. Okay, I will go. You may step back now and let me have a good rest." "Yes, miss. Please come in," the first voice responded, and then there was silence. Clang! The sound of the heavy door opening broke the silence in the room, and footsteps slowly entered. From Ethan's perspective, all he could see was a pair of leather shoes. But the shoes alone were an eye-opener for him. They seemed to be made of top-quality leather, shining with a deep luster. Exquisite golden lines and sparkling gemstones highlighted their luxury and nobility. Every time she took a step, the gems flickered, as if starlight was dancing under her feet. Clang! As the door closed again, the owner of the shoes breathed a long sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Chapter 726, The Eldest Lady of the Sun Chaser Family. The returning girl casually threw off her shoes, a stark contrast to her previously dignified demeanor. The seemingly priceless leather shoes were treated no differently than a pair of ordinary straw sandals, embodying the image of a noble lady who did not regard money as significant. With brisk steps, she swooped down and threw herself onto the soft bed, letting out a pleasant sigh. Ugh! What a dead person! What kind of social etiquette is this? Boring and annoying. Ethan finally heard the girl's voice clearly, a clear and slightly childish tone, which gave him a rough estimate of her age. Is she the daughter of an upper elf family? Ethan thought to himself. Judging from the voice, she is probably less than 100 years old, right? For night elves who have long and almost infinite lives, their physical maturity cycle is very different from that of humans. After about 150 years, night elves reach the adult standard that humans achieve at the age of 16 to 18. After that, they enter an almost endless peak period until the few decades near the end of their lifespan, when they age rapidly. Ethan was placed with his head facing the window, appearing as just a wounded bird in the girl's eyes. To maintain this image, he could not move freely, making it difficult for him to look back and see the girl's whole face. However, from her self-directed complaints, he sensed that this child was likely in the rebellious period most difficult for her elders to discipline. Her words fully revealed the rebelliousness and unruliness of adolescence. 5:43, huh? The girl rolled around on the bed for a while and suddenly noticed that Ethan's posture on the desk was different from before. She hummed in confusion, jumped off the bed lightly, and stepped on the soft carpet with her bare feet. She was not wearing socks, her small jade feet gently stepping on the soft carpet, making a brisk puff-puff sound as she trotted to the windowsill. As she got closer, Ethan gradually saw the girl's face clearly. As he guessed, the girl looked about 12 years old. Her little face was slightly baby-fat, but as delicate as a porcelain doll. Although she was still young, one could already vaguely see the beauty she would grow into, likely attracting countless suitors in the future. However, these were not the main points of Ethan's attention. He was not a lolicon, probably. In short, he was used to seeing countless beauties, so he didn't care much about the girl's appearance. What really caught his attention was her long golden hair, extremely rare among night elves. Since traveling to this world, Ethan had transformed into a night elf. In the process, he had come into contact with many kindred spirits with various hair colors. Night elves usually had purple, blue, and green hair, with occasional gray and white. Although there were variations in hue and color temperature, a light blonde hair color like the girl's was a first for him. This piqued his interest in her identity and background. "Oh!" The little girl pointed at Ethan in surprise and shouted, "Little crow, you finally woke up. Can you move?" Ethan could tell that the concern and anticipation in her eyes were genuine. She was indeed a kind girl, not yet contaminated by the atmosphere of the upper elf society. He wondered how long she could maintain her innocence and kindness. While Ethan was thinking, he opened his mouth, trying hard to imitate the caw of a crow, and said, "Caw," in response to the girl. The girl carefully turned Ethan's body over and examined his injuries gently and meticulously. Her fingers touched Ethan's wound gently, for fear of hurting him. "Well, although it's not healed yet, the injury is getting better. The herbs the headmaid mentioned are really useful." The girl smiled and reached out to touch Ethan's bird head, comforting him. "Don't be anxious, take your time, and heal your injury again. What makes you think that ordinary herbs can cure the damage caused by Archimonde's Fing, heir of death?" Ethan secretly complained in his heart. "I just used 5 rejuvenation techniques on myself, and it's still not completely healed." But as a crow, he couldn't say this, so he could only resist the urge to roll his eyes and let out an unpleasant caw. In the world of Ethan's previous life, crows were regarded as ominous birds. Their unpleasant calls and dark appearance were never liked by the world, often seen as symbols of disaster and death. However, this is not the case in this night elf society that worships the night and the moon. After all, owls and crows are the most common birds at night. Night elves have a very high level of acceptance of crows. According to statistics, when new raptor druids choose their first wilderness transformation, 80% of them choose storm crows, far surpassing raptors such as hawks. This is also the reason why Ethan chose to become a crow before. It is not easy for birds to be exposed everywhere, although he was exposed in the end. The crow's dividing line. Next, Ethan stayed in the girl's boudoir, recovering from his injuries and collecting intelligence. He originally thought that it would take several days to learn useful information, but he didn't know if it was a loon's blessing. In just one day, Ethan collected a vital piece of information. The full name of the girl who rescued him was Elise Sunstrider. She was the biological daughter of Dathrimar Sunstrider. It was rumored that she had a brother who was hundreds of years older than her. I've been searching for him for thousands of times, but suddenly I looked back and found that person in a dimly lit place. Ethan sighed secretly in his heart, feeling that this time he got there without any effort. In fact, this news was not a sudden surprise to him. When he saw the girl's bright blonde hair, he had already noticed and guessed it. As Ethan knows, the Sunstrider family, as a member of the High Elves, holds a pivotal position among all elven nobles. The current head of the family, Dath Remar, is an important member of Queen Ashara's court advisory group, which is enough to demonstrate the dignity and glory of their family. But beyond that, the Sunstrider family is unique among the entire Highborn. In this night elven society that worships the night and the moon god Elune, they actually have a special liking for the sun and prefer bright daytime, which undoubtedly makes them look a little different among their kind. From their surname Sunstrider, we can see that this family seems to have had an indissoluble bond with the sun from the first generation. Their preferences, beliefs, and even family crests all reveal their reverence and pursuit of the sun. It's no wonder that the kingdom of High Elves controlled by the Sunstriders in the future will completely change the Night Elves' habit of loving the night, becoming a race that rests at sunset, much like humans, dwarves, and other races. As an outlier among the Highborn, the Sunstrider family is often ridiculed and ostracized by their colleagues. But despite this, they still stick to their beliefs and traditions. This clearly shows the power of the Sunstrider family. After all, they are one of the ancient nobles with a long history in the Dark Knight Empire. Even with the alien debuff, their status remains unshakable. At this moment, Ethan was residing in a luxurious mansion owned by the Sunstrider family in the aristocratic district of Shin Aili. This mansion is a stone's throw away from his target, Song Yu. He stood in front of the window, looking out. Through the dense treetops, Ethan could clearly see the majestic outline of the palace. Recalling his search for the Sunstrider courtyard, he couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. If it had been during the day, or if he could fly higher, he would have recognized this brightly colored house at a glance. The Sunchaser family's love for the sun is multifaceted and is also reflected in the color scheme of their building. Among the surrounding structures that generally use gray and white tones, this bright, yellow mansion stands out, like a radiant pearl embedded in a gray cityscape. The Sunchaser family's mansion, with its vibrant yellow hue, looks somewhat out of place amidst the commonly used gray and white tones of the neighboring buildings. This prominent family naturally possesses extremely rich resources. As the sole descendant of this family, Alice has the privilege of mobilizing some of these resources. These include extremely precious medicinal herbs, which have provided Ethan with excellent healing conditions. However, it is regrettable that although mages possess powerful magical abilities, they are not adept at healing. To make matters worse, the current high-level elves have a tense relationship with the druids and moon priests who are proficient in healing spells. It can be said that they have completely fallen out. Otherwise, Ethan would have definitely been taken to receive their healing spells, and the remaining power of death on his wounds might have been removed in time. But then again, if it weren't for the dispute between the upper elves, the druids, and the moon priests, Ethan might not have suffered such serious injuries in the first place. Therefore, he had to rely solely on his own healing spells. Under the combined effect of the precious herbs and his own healing spells, his injuries have recovered by 70% to 80%. His body is gradually healing, and his strength is slowly returning. Chapter 727, The Days of Being a Pet in a Noble Family. After a few days of getting along, Ethan had a deeper understanding of the character and daily habits of the eldest lady, Elise Sunstrider. This girl, born into an upper-class elf family, was burdened with heavy academic pressure every day. Her time was meticulously scheduled, and she was immersed in her studies most of the time. Tutors, carefully selected by the head of the family, Dath Remar, arrived one after another, consuming nearly all of Elise's time. Ethan knew that this was similar to the elite education system in the United States of Blue Star. While ordinary people pursued a happy education and viewed the college entrance examination system of other countries as a scourge, The elites in the United States sought the best education for their children. They enrolled them in top private schools, conducted militarized management, and hired the best professors, fearing their children would fall behind their peers. Fortunately, her father, Dathrema, understood the importance of balance. Despite the tight study schedule, he considerately left some free time for his daughter. Every night, Elise had a few hours of free time, allowing her to temporarily escape the prison of study and enjoy a moment of tranquility. Every 3 days, she had the opportunity to go out and experience the outside world. Additionally, she could attend a gathering of ladies her age once a week, providing her with precious time to communicate and relax with her peers. Elise, at the flowering age full of fantasy, inevitably felt conflicted facing her heavy schoolwork. At the ladies' parties, she came into contact with many entertainment novels from her best friends to pass the boring time. The fantasy plots in these novels gradually affected her, making her yearn for freedom and adventure even more. However, fantasy is just fantasy. As the only successor of the Sunstrider family, Elise had high expectations from her elders since birth, and her life trajectory was carefully planned. Elise knew she could not disobey her parents, who had loved her since she was a child. In front of everyone, she always showed the image of a gentle and obedient good girl. However, only when she stepped into her little world, behind closed doors, could she truly let down her guard and release the long-repressed emotions deep in her heart. At this time, Ethan, who was mistaken for an ordinary crow by Elise, unexpectedly became the sustenance of her soul. Since Ethan regained consciousness, he had invisibly played the role of a listener and became the outlet for Elise's emotions. "Oh, my father really doesn't consider my feelings." Elise leaned against the window, gently holding her cheeks with her hands, a little helplessness and annoyance in her eyes. "I have reminded him many times to knock before entering my room, but every time he seems not to hear me and just barges in without any scruples." She paused and continued. "Just like just now, I was changing clothes, and he suddenly opened the door and came in. If I hadn't blocked the door in time, he would have almost seen it. How could this happen? A father who doesn't respect his daughter's privacy. He is so informal at home." "Quoi?" Ethan called softly, as if comforting Elise. Although Ethan mainly relied on himself to recover from his injuries, and the herbs provided by Elise only played a supporting role, he was still full of gratitude to Elise. After all, she had shown him kindness and care during his vulnerable moments. It was this young girl who took him in and even used precious herbs to speed up his recovery. At least mentally, Ethan had to acknowledge her kindness. Therefore, when Elise confided in him, he would always respond from time to let her know that he was listening. When the girl complained to him, he would respond similarly, ensuring she knew she wasn't talking to herself. Elise interpreted this as a sign that the crow was considerate and even somewhat psychic. So, whenever she encountered something unpleasant, she would come to Ethan and talk to him about her troubles. Ethan always listened patiently and accompanied her through every difficult moment. During the few days he stayed in Elise's room, Ethan had naturally seen several times the head of the Sunstrider family, Dathrema, an upper elf noble, and the target he wanted to contact. Dathrema always maintained a rigorous and meticulous appearance. However, in his own home, he seemed to relax and occasionally show some informal behavior. Not long ago, Dathrema broke into his daughter Elise's room without warning. This rude behavior immediately aroused strong resentment from Elise. She expressed her protest resolutely, and the small family dispute was finally settled through the mediation of Elise's mother. Dathrema reluctantly bowed his head and apologized to his daughter, which also allowed Ethan to see another side of this noble man within the family. As for Ethan, he spent a lot of time with Elise, and their interactions became as natural as breathing. In the process, he inevitably witnessed moments when Elise changed clothes. Although in Elise's eyes, Ethan was just a crow with unusual spirituality, her trust and intimacy with this crow were far greater than with ordinary people. Therefore, she would avoid her father's eyes out of shyness, but in front of Ethan, she could show her truest side without any scruples. Because of this, Ethan was no longer surprised or embarrassed when the same thing happened. Now, Even if he saw Elise changing clothes again, he would just watch quietly, without any disturbance in his heart. Of course, this experience directly numbed Ethan. He couldn't even imagine how shy Elise would be if one day she learned that her cherished crow was actually a druid. Based on his in-depth understanding of Elise's character, he could predict that the noble and shy eldest lady would be so embarrassed that she would have nowhere to hide. She might wrap herself tightly in a quilt, like a helpless little dumpling, rolling on the bed until her shy mood calmed down a little. While trying to recover from his injury these days, Ethan did not take any time off and observed Elise's daily life. When Elise was busy, he was also thinking about how to use the power of the Sunstrider family to slip into the palace smoothly. He knew that with proper planning, Dathrema was fully capable of taking him into the place where Tyrande was being held. While Elise was in class, he had been thinking about how to use the power of the Sunstrider family to sneak into the palace. As long as he did it properly, Dathrema, who could enter the palace at will, was indeed capable of bringing him in. However, the crux of the problem was how to get Dathrema to agree to bring a crow into the palace. This had become the biggest problem Ethan currently faced. He understood that this required a carefully designed plan and a just right opportunity. A few days later, Ethan, who had fully recovered from his injuries, was finally able to expand his range of activities and explore the surrounding area more freely. Elise happily took him out of the splendid mansion of the Sunstrider family, preparing to go shopping in the market for the upcoming little ladies' party. Such gatherings were held once a week and became a feast for the upper elf ladies to exchange experiences and show off their style. Upper elf ladies who are friends with the Sunstrider family will attend. Alice, eager to show off her psychic crow to her friends, began to dress up carefully as soon as it was dark, surrounded by her maids. A dazzling array of gorgeous clothes filled the entire room. She examined each piece carefully and tried them on repeatedly. In the end, she chose an elegant white blouse with exquisite lace on the sleeves to highlight her innocence and nobility. For the lower body, she selected a black pleated skirt, the length just right to cover her slender knees, looking dignified yet playful. After contemplating in front of the mirror for a long time, Alice chose a pair of purple gloves with hollow patterns, adding a touch of mystery to her overall look. "Xiaohei, come here quickly," she called out excitedly to Ethan before going out, extending her left hand in anticipation. "DM," Ethan lazily responded. Although his injury had healed, he still appeared a bit listless. However, he slowly flapped his wings and flew to Alice's left hand, preparing to accompany her. At this moment, Alice's purple gloves contrasted beautifully with Ethan's shiny black and purple feathers, making them look like a perfect match. No wonder she chose such a pair of gloves. Ethan also had his own plans in mind. He intended to find an opportunity to confront Dathrema within the next 2 days, after fully recovering from his injury. At the same time, he planned to make complete preparations to sneak into the palace and implement his plan. The High Elves did not need carriages when traveling. When Alice walked elegantly to the gate, 10 exquisite sedan chairs were already quietly waiting in front of the Chaser family's mansion. As the name suggests, these palanquins do not require night elf servants to carry them on their shoulders and hands. They rely on arcane energy to move. Although they appear to float in the air as lightly as magnetic levitation, the principle behind these sedans is not very complex. Invisible servants, composed of a series of force fields, carry the sedan from the front and back. These invisible servants, though limited in intelligence, can understand and carry out simple commands. The person in the sedan can control it and reach their destination just by speaking. The intelligence of these servants is sufficient to remember routes and automatically avoid obstacles, functioning like a magical version of a self-driving new energy vehicle. Of course, this kind of sedan, driven by invisible servants, may not match the speed of a new energy vehicle with 4 wheels. It is a dimensionality reduction blow when compared to an ordinary sedan. Since these invisible servants are composed of force fields and driven by arcane energy, they are not limited by physical fatigue. Therefore, when traveling long distances, the speed of this arcane sedan is far faster than those relying on human power for transportation. In this era, it is an elegant and efficient way of traveling. Chapter 728, Meeting the Queen on the Road. On the way to their shopping destination in the self-propelled arcane sedan, Ethan looked out through the exquisite small window and noticed a large number of flying demons circling and searching over the distant civilian areas. Their figures cast shadows in the sky, frightening the civilians below so much that they did not dare to go outside. It seemed that the search for him had not ceased. Alice suddenly let out an exclamation, breaking the silence in the carriage. This exclamation also brought Ethan's thoughts back to the present. Only then did he realize that the arcane sedan, which had been traveling at a constant speed, had suddenly stopped. Ethan looked out of the window curiously and saw 2 rows of fully armed high elf guards standing on both sides of the wide road in the noble district. Their postures were tall and straight, their eyes firm, and they exuded an inviolable majesty. Before he could be confused, Elise provided an explanation. "I didn't expect to meet Her Majesty the Queen on her trip," she said, hurriedly arranging her appearance for fear of losing etiquette in front of the Queen. She walked out of the sedan lightly, stood aside cautiously, lowered her head to show respect, and waited for the Queen to pass. Queen Azshara? Ethan thought to himself. He had already heard countless legends about this beacon of light, and was intensely curious about her style and charm. He was amazed by the evaluation of Azshara in the original book. Queen Azshara's appearance actually surpassed Tyrande's. Ethan had seen Tyrande's appearance before, and the beauty of the priestess had already moved his heart. Her appearance was almost perfect. Because of this, he was willing to risk offending 2 important figures, Malfurion and Illidan, to pursue the priestess. However, at this moment, Ethan fell into a deeper reverie. He tried to imagine what kind of appearance could surpass the perfection of Tyrande in his mind. Unfortunately, in the game, Queen Azshara was only a supporting role, while Tyrande was a significant character. Perhaps due to limited art resources, the Queen's peerless elegance was not perfectly displayed in the game, let alone the beauty gap between her and Tyrande. Although Tyrande in the game was very different from the Tyrande Ethan witnessed in reality. But this time, Ethan was lucky enough to be able to see with his own eyes the true appearance of the Queen, who was popular throughout the Dark Knight Empire. He looked forward to observing her carefully and seeing what kind of appearance she would have that would make the entire Dark Knight Empire fall in love with her. So Ethan, who was left alone in the sedan, peeked out through the exquisite small window. In his crow's eyes, the upper elves who used to roam leisurely and carelessly on the streets of the aristocratic district were now facing the avenue in an orderly manner, with their heads lowered as if they were waiting for someone important. This was enough to reflect Azshara's power. About half a minute later, the originally noisy main road suddenly became quiet, leaving only the sound of slight footsteps echoing in the air. The sound of footsteps was completely different from the crisp sound made by leather or cloth shoes when they come into contact with the ground. It was more steady and solid, as if every step was deeply rooted in the earth, exuding an indescribable majesty. Sound like this. Didn't Queen Azshara wear shoes? Ethan secretly speculated. In order not to arouse Alice's suspicion, he did not act rashly, but waited patiently, until the steady footsteps slowly passed by Elise's sedan and gradually entered his field of vision. The first thing that caught his eye was a slender lavender calf with skin as white as jade, revealing a noble and elegant temperament. As the owner of the calf continued to move, a dignified moon-white dress swayed gently, slowly covering the exposed skin. Due to the limitation of the angle, Ethan was unable to see Queen Azshara's complete face, and could only vaguely see the left side of her body and cheek. However, just this half of the figure was enough to make Ethan, who comes from the internet age and feels that he has seen all the beautiful things in the world, fall into a daze. He stared out the window intently, feeling an indescribable emotion well up in his heart. The beauty of Queen Azshara exceeded his imagination. It was a peerless elegance that could not be described in words. Under the bright moonlight, Ashara's flawless and beautiful face carried a confident and leisurely smile, which seemed to warm the entire night sky. Her innate nobility and elegance made people yearn for her. Her slender feet, without shoes or socks, rested lightly on the clean ground, and every step seemed to step on people's hearts. Under the looming long skirt, her legs were like exquisite porcelain, white and flawless, making people want to take good care of her. The long skirt swayed gently with her steps, and the body-shaping tailoring unreservedly showed off her exquisite figure. Her curves were elegant and graceful. Ashara's long silver hair was exactly the same as Maev's, but it looked even more elegant and refined. She didn't make any modifications to her long hair, just letting it hang casually behind her back, like a silver waterfall under the moonlight. From the side, you could still vaguely see a small crown on her head, inlaid with many arcane jewels that sparkled with mysterious light, adding a sense of nobility and mystery to her beauty. Under Ethan's attention, Queen Ashara slowly walked past Elise's sedan. Seeing that she was about to leave his sight, Ethan couldn't help but feel a little bit reluctant, but soon he expressed his heartfelt admiration. This light of light is truly worthy of its reputation. This transcendent temperament and amazing beauty indeed make it easy for people to have a subconscious fondness for her. Even someone like me, who is used to seeing the prosperity of the world, can't resist her charm. Just when Ethan thought Ashara would drift away, the queen's swaying steps suddenly stopped. The maids behind her also stopped at the same time, as if they had a clear understanding. Ethan had just become confused about this, and when he was about to explore the reason, a pair of golden eyes had already passed through the crowd and locked on to him accurately. The majesty and depth in her eyes made Ethan's heart tremble involuntarily, as if he was captured by some invisible force. Not good. Ethan's heart tightened. He didn't know why Ashara suddenly turned her gaze to him, but it was obviously too late to look away now, and it might attract more suspicion and attention. However, Ethan was no ordinary person, and this small scene did not trouble him. He quickly adjusted his mentality and remained unchanged in response to changes. He kept his clear and calm eyes and looked at Ashara. At the same time, he tilted his head in feigned confusion and said, "Croak," as if asking, "What are you doing?" This sudden crow startled Elilith, who had been looking down at Ashara secretly with her peripheral vision. While keeping her head down, she turned slightly sideways towards Ethan. "Xiaohei, don't make any noise." Alice lowered her voice and hurriedly stopped her, for fear that the sudden noise would attract the queen's attention. Ashara did not take the bold crow's rude behavior to heart. She cast a scrutinizing gaze on Ethan, and her eyes gradually became deep and intriguing. It seemed that under the reflection of her golden eyes, no secrets could be hidden. "This crow is quite interesting." Ashara chuckled, with a hint of amusement in her voice. Behind her, a beautiful maid took a cautious step forward and asked in a low voice, "Your Majesty, is there something wrong?" "Nothing," Ashara responded lightly, while giving a sweet smile to Ethan, who was pretending to be dumbfounded. That smile was like a blooming epiphyllum, short-lived but intoxicating. It seemed to eclipse the bright moon. At that moment, Ethan felt as if time had stopped, and he was completely captivated by her presence. Ethan almost fell into a trance involuntarily. Fortunately, he had already activated his mental barrier, preventing him from falling into Ashara's trap. Is it a magic control spell, charm human, or suggestion? Ethan pondered silently, impressed by Ashara's magical prowess. Being able to cast such a spell silently with such an amazing effect, she is indeed Queen Ashara. Ashara was puzzled to see that the crow's eyes did not change, causing her to doubt herself. However, she maintained her composure, turning her head away as if nothing had happened. "Keep going, Vashj," she ordered softly. "I just suddenly remembered something small." "Yes, Your Majesty," the head maid Vashj responded respectfully. Despite her outward calm, Ashara's curiosity wasn't entirely quelled. She turned back and glanced at the arcane sedan where the peculiar crow was perched. "By the way, who is the owner of that sedan?" she asked casually, as if making small talk. Vashj followed Ashara's line of sight, initially overlooking the seemingly ordinary crow. Instead, her attention was drawn to Elil's, who was bowing her head respectfully next to the sedan. Your Majesty, Vashti replied, that is Alaris Sunstrider, the only daughter of Dathramar Sunstrider's advisor. Oh. Ashara raised her eyebrows slightly and nodded noncommittally. She did not ask Vashti any further questions, but gracefully continued her casual tour of the palace. It was as if the crow and its owner were just an insignificant episode in her journey. Chapter 729. I don't pretend anymore. I show my cards. Ha! Ethan and Alelas breathed a sigh of relief simultaneously, watching Queen Ashara's back gradually disappear from sight. As the Queen's guards dispersed, the quiet streets once again returned to their former hustle and bustle. The upper elves gathered together, discussing various topics related to Queen Ashara in whispers, their voices full of awe and admiration. Alelas returned to her sedan, stretched out her finger with some complaints, lightly tapped Ethan's head, and murmured coquettishly, Xiao Hei, what were you yelling about just now? What if you attract Her Majesty the Queen's wrath? Not even I can protect you. Ethan blinked, pretending to be clueless, and responded to Alelas's complaint with a nonsensical melon for a week without meaning. Fortunately, Alelas did not dwell too much on this small issue. She had kept her head down just now, not daring to raise her head to look at Queen Ashara, so she did not notice Queen Ashara's tentative spell-casting before. However, Gwyn, who was at odds with Ashara, captured this scene clearly. He was secretly vigilant in his heart. Although he could not be sure what the Light of Light was thinking specifically, his reason and instinct told him that the Queen should have noticed something, but he could not completely confirm it yet. Ethan's multiple disguises combined with otherworld spells are not easy to see through. After this little episode, the subsequent journey seemed extremely smooth. The arcane sedan walked leisurely through the deserted market, completed the purchase, and finally stopped steadily in front of the Sunchaser family's mansion. Ethan had little interest in gatherings of aristocratic ladies. In his eyes, it was just a group of girls who had never experienced the world, chatting away their loneliness in their spare time. It was a pity that at this time, he was just the pet of one of the girls and had to lie down and endure the party. After finally making it to the end of the party, Ethan felt relieved to finally get through the long and boring event. Now, his injuries had healed, and his condition had returned to its best. No matter what accident he encountered, he was confident that he could evacuate safely. Therefore, he decided to implement the plan he had been brewing in his heart for a long time, a showdown with Vosrema. However, just when he was about to fly out of the room, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a handsome night elf man walked in. His long golden hair was elegantly tied back by a silver hair ornament, and he was dressed in gorgeous upper elf clothing, with a warm and friendly smile on his face. It was Dathrema himself. After Dathrema entered the room, his eyes instantly caught Ethan. However, he just glanced at the crow casually and did not pay much attention to it. Vosrema had long been used to her daughter adopting a crow and doting on it very much. Ethan could see that Dathrema looked at his daughter tenderly, and the expression on his face gradually became serious. He squatted down, stroked his daughter's hair lovingly, and said softly and solemnly, Alice, listen up. He paused, seeming to organize his words. Dad received an order from Her Majesty the Queen and needs to leave the city. He will probably be away for 2 to 3 days. Hearing this, Alice's eyes flashed with worry and reluctance. Even though her father had very strict requirements for her, and even if his behavior at home was a bit out of line sometimes, he was indeed a good father, and Alice loved him very much. This look was caught by Dathrema, and he couldn't help but feel soft in his heart, but he still warned her seriously, during this period, you must listen to your brother and mother at home, and you must not go out and run around. Do you understand? Well, Alice tilted her head slightly, her eyes full of doubts and uneasiness. Father, mother, and brother all said that it is very dangerous outside the city recently. Why did Her Majesty? The Queen asked you to leave the city at this time. Dathrema smiled bitterly, shook his head, and sighed softly. It's a long story, and you may not understand it now. In short, you have to remember what your father said. Be good at home during this period, and don't cause any trouble for your mother or your brother. Although Alice seemed to understand, she still nodded sensibly. Okay, I understand, Dad. Rama smiled happily and gently pressed a kiss on Alice's pink forehead. Good girl, Daddy will be back soon. In fact, this mission was not a direct order from the Queen, as Rama had said. To be more precise, it was an application he had taken the initiative to make to Queen Ashara as an advisor. Rama did not support the war and was eager to have a face-to-face dialogue with the rebels, trying to explore whether a truce and reconciliation agreement could be reached through peaceful means. However, as the Burning Legion's actions became increasingly rampant, Rama himself held pessimistic expectations about the outcome of this mission. Still, anything was always worth a try. The Sunchaser family had always had an adventurous spirit, so Rama decided to embark on the trip and first communicate with the top brass of the resistance. He was eager to understand the core demands of this group of people who were scornfully called rebels and untouchables by his colleagues. Queen Ashara showed no interest in his proposal, and those colleagues who were close to the Burning Legion mocked and ridiculed him mercilessly. However, the Sunstrider family played an important role in Upper Elf society, and there were also leaders and factions within the society that supported Rama. Due to his status, Rama had automatically become a representative of the Peace faction. Regarding his request, no matter how dictatorial Queen Ashara was, she had to seriously consider it. After Rama's repeated requests and unremitting persistence, the Queen finally reluctantly agreed to his mission plan. Apart from the negotiations, Rama didn't make any excessive demands. Not only did he agree to the favor at no cost, but it also appeased the Peace faction. Why not? However, it was true that Ashara's attitude towards the peace talks was perfunctory. She did not even arrange additional personal guards to carry out the so-called protection of Rama. This decision was not because Ashara had delegated her authority enough, but because she simply did not really want to talk. After all, diplomatic power is an important power of the monarch. Ashara did not even send a monitor this time, which was abnormal. The entire mission process would be completely performed by Rama, which would undoubtedly be a great test of his ability and wisdom. The young Alice did not notice the worry in her father's eyes, but Ethan, who had been silently observing from the sidelines, keenly captured the subtle changes in his expression. He sensed the surroundings of the room, and after confirming that no one else was present, Ethan suddenly unfolded his wings and soared into the air from Alice's hands. This sudden move made Alice look to the sky in shock, her little hands waving in panic. "Ah!" she exclaimed. "Xiao-Hei, where are you going?" Ethan's dark eyes looked directly at Alice. This was the first time he used a spell in front of the girl, hypnosis. As the spell was cast, Alice's originally agile eyes suddenly became dull, and then she instantly fell into a deep sleep. The abnormal change in his daughter made Rama's face instantly serious. He quickly hugged his daughter behind him and watched the unusual crow warily. "A crow that can use magic," Rama asked in a deep voice. "Who are you?" At this time, Rama's body was surging with legendary-level arcane energy, ready to be unleashed. It seemed that as long as Ethan said a wrong word, a steady stream of arcane power would be directed at him. Magical attacks would fall on him. Ethan was slightly surprised that Rama actually possessed such power. However, he did not feel scared because of this. He remained calm and leisurely folded his wings, landing on the stone table in the garden pavilion. "Please don't be too panicked." The crow's eyes flashed with wisdom as it slowly spoke in human language. Rama looked at this talking crow in astonishment, his heart filled with vigilance and curiosity. "Mr. Rama Sunstrider," the crow continued, "I am deeply sorry that I need to meet you in this way. But there is a reason. I have extremely important matters that I want to discuss with you alone. These matters are not appropriate for your beloved daughter to hear." It paused slightly before continuing. After all, sometimes knowing too much is not a good thing, especially for an innocent child who has not yet learned to keep secrets. Rama backed away slowly while protecting Elise, his eyes full of wariness, always staring closely at this unusual crow. He felt relieved when he saw that the crow had folded its wings and seemed to have no intention of continuing to attack. He frowned and asked in a deep voice, "So, What exactly do you want to talk to me about? Why did you choose to lurk next to Elise? Is there someone behind you who is instigating you? What interest do they have in the Sunstrider family? The crow laughed softly and said, Mr. Dathramar, you may have misunderstood something. I am not here on behalf of anyone. I have no ill will towards Elise or the Sunstrider family. If there is any reason for me to stay here, it can only be said to be the guidance of the moon god Elune, and it is the accident and necessity of fate. Chapter 730. What did Sargeras do to Argus? Under Dathrima's shocked gaze, the ordinary-looking crow began to change. Its body gradually expanded, and the feathers disappeared, transforming into night elf-style clothing. Soon, a young night elf man stood where the crow had been. He had blue-black hair and bright golden eyes. Huh! The man took a deep breath and stretched, savoring the freedom of returning to his human form. He moved his body, especially his injured right shoulder. As he did, the bandage that Elith had carefully wrapped for him slipped to the ground. After confirming that his body was recovering well, Ethan raised his head to meet Dathrima's wary eyes and shrugged helplessly. As you can see, Ethan said with a smile, I am a druid. Don't talk nonsense, Dathrima interrupted coldly, taking out his staff with a solemn expression, ready to attack at any moment. I have never heard of a druid using hypnosis. Who are you? Ethan scratched his head helplessly. I'm really just a druid. If you don't believe me, check it out. I encountered some special circumstances, so I have this ability. Seeing that Dathrima was still full of suspicion, Ethan sighed. Forget it. To make you believe me, I'll tell you the whole story. That is to say, Dathrima began, slightly less vigilant after listening to Ethan's explanation. He put down his staff and re-examined the young man before him. When you were trying to infiltrate Zin Ashari, you were hit by Archimond and fell, and then happened to be rescued by Elith? Dathrima tried to confirm the story he had heard. This was not the true version, but Ethan needed a reason to explain why he was with the Sunstrider family. He didn't want Dathrima to think he had ulterior motives, so he fabricated an accident. Ethan nodded calmly. In short, yes. Dathrima thought thoughtfully. No wonder, he murmured, and everything began to make sense. I understand why the Burning Legion has recently stepped up patrols in civilian areas and commercial streets. There is even a Nazrism leader personally supervising the battle. It turns out they are looking for you. But Ethan didn't want to dwell on this topic. He straightened his expression, looked at Dathrima, and said, But now is not the time to talk about this. Mr. Sunchaser, let's get down to business. I'd rather hear your thoughts on the war. He stared at Dathrima with burning eyes. I have heard that among the many Upper Elf families, the Sunstrider family is unique. Your attitude towards civilians is more tolerant and gentle than that of other compatriots. So, what do you think about the Burning Legion's wanton massacre of civilians? Should we just let those demons wreak havoc in our world until the true leader of the Burning Legion comes to Azeroth and lets the entire planet be possessed by evil, eroded, and desolate? After listening to Ethan's words, Dathrima remained calm on the surface, showing no clues. He and Ethan sat facing each other, while he gently caressed Elaith, who was sleeping peacefully on his knees. Mr. Koya, I don't understand what you are saying, Dathrima finally spoke, feigning confusion. How can you conclude that the Burning Legion will use evil energy to taint the entire planet? You know, they have promised Queen Ashara that after the resistance in Azeroth is eradicated, they will return the management of the world's night elves. Is it going to be handed back to you highborn elves? Ethan chuckled, a hint of sarcasm in his words. He paused and continued. You actually believe Sargeras' sweet words? Speaking of this, why don't you ask the Eridar people next to the Well of Eternity? Their beautiful hometown, Argus, is in the Burning Legion. What did it look like after it arrived? Argus. Dathrima's eyes flashed with shock. As an upper elf, he had learned some information about the Burning Legion and had heard the name before. When he heard Ethan mention it, he began to believe Ethan's words. However, he still had some doubts. Even among the upper elves, only a few knew this kind of information. So he couldn't help but ask, how did you learn about such secrets? The Burning Legion would never take the initiative to leak these secrets to you, right? Do you still remember how I calmed Miss Elise just now? Ethan smiled mysteriously and winked at Dathrema. That was not a trick of arcane magic, but the power that comes from the heart. Ethan suddenly leaned forward slightly, and Dathrema noticed a deep light flash in the golden eyes of the man in front of him. Under this light, his heart seemed to be laid bare. Then he heard Ethan whisper, "Mr. Dathrema, maybe you are curious about the power I just used. Please allow me to show you a little bit." After saying that, Ethan closed his eyes and gently clasped his hands together, as if casting a spell. The next moment, Dathrema felt his heart stir, as if a warm and gentle force gently touched it. He heard Ethan's voice suddenly ringing in his heart, the voice very clear. This kind of power can penetrate deep into the spiritual level and have a profound impact on the soul. As long as it is used properly, even those demons will have difficulty resisting its control and will involuntarily give up everything they know. Ethan paused and continued, "My information comes from those Eridar captured by the Resistance. In the face of the power of the mind, they cannot keep their secrets." Although Ethan's intelligence source was fabricated, what he told was true, so he was not lying to Dathrema. Dathrema's expression was unpredictable, and he was undergoing a fierce internal struggle. Reason told him that what Ethan said was true, but as an upper elf who was born to oppose the civilian class, he found it difficult to accept this cruel fact emotionally. Under the ingenious promises of the Burning Legion and Sargeras, most of the Highborn believed their words. They believed with great expectation that the Burning Legion would help them wipe out all the resistance forces on Azeroth, and then the world would be returned to the hands of Queen Ashara. They only needed to surrender nominally. This attractive prospect gave the upper elves the hope of continuing to sit firmly on the throne of the privileged class. Not only that, they also felt that they might even go one step further. With the help of this alliance with the Burning Legion, the forces of the Dark Knight Empire would be able to break through the constraints of their home star and expand their influence to the vast universe. So, Queen Ashara, does she know about these things? Dathrema frowned and asked. Ethan recalled the brief eye contact with Ashara before. Judging from her eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything, the queen should not be an idiot. To be honest, I'm not sure, but I think that a shrewd person like Queen Ashara should be able to see through some of the false promises of the Burning Legion. He considered his words and spoke slowly. As for why she chose to ignore these lies and continue to cooperate with the Burning Legion, that is unknown to me. Those of you Highborn who have been with her day and night may have a deeper understanding of the Queen's true intentions than I do. Chapter 731, Persuasion over Zin. Aislinn, dusk fell slowly like a heavy silk cloth. Under the night sky, Tichondrius hovered in mid-air above the civilian area, his face as dark as storm clouds, his eyes flashing with irritation and anger. Trash! His roar echoed like thunder, making all the demons around him shiver involuntarily. A doomsday guard floated in front of him, trembling as he reported on the progress of the search. However, Tichondrius could no longer listen to any explanations. The anger in his heart was like a volcano about to erupt, and he urgently needed an outlet to vent. Suddenly, a gloomy green flame spurted from his palm, instantly engulfing the unlucky Doomsday Guard. The guard didn't even have time to scream before he was reduced to ashes. Huh. Tichondrius exhaled a long breath, releasing the pent-up anger in his chest. The surrounding demons remained silent, fearing they would be the next to suffer. Half a month ago, he had taken over this task from Lord Archimond, thinking he could complete it easily. But the situation had developed beyond his expectations. The downed crow had disappeared without a trace, as if it had evaporated from the world. He had mobilized all his men and spent half a month searching the entire civilian area, but found nothing. This frustration made him more anxious and angrier than ever before. As the night grew darker, Tichondrius's mood became heavier. He knew that if he could not find the crow soon, his status and reputation would be severely damaged. As the leader of the Nathrezim, Tichondrius was as cunning and perceptive as most of his kind, and he knew Archimond's temperament well. Archimond, the Legion giant known as the Polluter, was by no means a patient leader. He was now willing to wait by the Well of Eternity only because of the irresistible order from Sargeras. To enter the territory of Azeroth as soon as possible and prevent any potential changes, Archimonde had accepted the fallen Titan's will, closely monitoring and urging the Upper Elves to continuously expand the portal. In the face of this important task, he had to restrain his naturally hot temper. Unless the Well of Eternity faced a real threat, he would continue to suppress his nature and remain by its side. However, if a person with an impatient personality is forced to act against his nature for too long, there will eventually be an unbearable moment. The accumulated resentment and anger are like suppressed volcanic lava, urgently needing an outlet to vent. As a loyal subordinate of Sargeras, Archimonde knew that venting his anger on his superior was tantamount to digging his own grave. So, how would this anger be released? The answer was self-evident. This thought flashed through Tichondrius's mind, causing him to shiver involuntarily. He took a deep breath, tried to calm himself, and then gave a stern order. "Continue searching. I will give you 3 more days. Within 3 days, I must see clear results." The demons around him lowered their heads, not daring to meet his eyes. "If you fail to complete the mission assigned by Lord Archimonde..." Tichondrius's voice suddenly became low and menacing. "You know what the consequences will be. I don't care what means you use. I just want results." He waved his arm suddenly. "Go ahead and carry out my orders." "Yes!" The surrounding demons responded in unison. Under the irritated wave of the Dreadlord, the demons quickly dispersed like birds and beasts, resuming their frantic search of the civilian areas. In the civilian area of Zin Azalin, the demons' search operations became more and more frantic. However, their target, Ethan, was hiding in the aristocratic area, sitting peacefully in the garden of the Sunstrider family, talking to the head of the family. Shrima Sunstrider spoke in depth about the Burning Legion's true intentions in coming to Azeroth. When Ethan revealed his true form in Minglangs, in front of Dathrima, Ethan was actually a little worried. After all, his previous understanding of Dathrima came from the original Hister. And history is suitable for judging general trends, but it is inevitably distorted when details are involved. He didn't know how the Queen's advisor would react, whether he would directly launch a violent attack without listening to his explanation. But to his surprise, Dathrima did not act rashly. Instead, he started talking to Ethan in a cautious manner. Perhaps Dathrima had already had doubts about the behavior of the Burning Legion, so he finally chose to calm down and listen to Ethan's words. The most fundamental purpose of the Burning Legion's attack on Azeroth is not simply to conquer or destroy, but to take the lead in this competition with the old gods, corrupting and controlling the sleeping Titan souls in Azeroth. This star soul is known as the existence with the most potential and is the prey coveted by the Lord of the Void and the Burning Legion. Although the Burning Legion and the Lord of the Void, the immediate boss of the ancient gods, have the same purpose, their methods are completely different. The latter is good at using the power of the Void to corrupt, while the former uses evil energy to achieve its goals. But behind all this, the bigger difference lies in their motivations. The purpose of the Lord of the Void is to control the entire universe, and the purpose of the Burning Legion is to stop the Lord of the Void. Obviously, the Burning Legion's motives sound very righteous, but why did they become what they are today? Because in order to achieve this goal, they chose the worst means. They chose to destroy the entire universe to stop the Lords of the Void. Of course, Ethan did not tell Dathrima all of the above. The secrets of the Titan Star Soul and the Lord of the Void may still be too deep and unknown for Dathrima. What's more, with Dathrima's current status and strength, even if he knows these secrets, he may not be able to change anything. Therefore, too many explanations will only increase his confusion and helplessness. So Ethan chose another approach. He cleverly exposed Sargeras's repeated lies. By presenting a series of factual evidence, he allowed Dathrima to realize and think independently. He cleverly guided Dathrima with words, allowing him to gradually become aware of the sinister intentions of the Burning Legion. As for how Dathrima would interpret and figure out the true purpose of the Burning Legion, that was his own business, and Ethan had already fulfilled his responsibility. Seeing Dathrima sinking into deep thought for a long time, with his attitude wavering, Ethan couldn't help but smile in his heart, but he didn't make a sound and just waited quietly. That's all I can tell you. How you proceed next depends entirely on your own choice. Seeing that the other party had almost thought about it, Ethan looked at Dathrima with deep eyes, as if he had something to say. Pointedly, he hinted, "If you have different ideas about your fellow Upper Elf colleagues, this mission to the front line may be a good opportunity to explore the truth. Go and witness with your own eyes what the Burning Legion's so-called war against rebellion is. At that time, your contact with the top brass of the resistance may bring you some new inspiration." Dathrima was awakened by Ethan's words. His confused eyes gradually focused, and he looked at Ethan in front of him with a complicated look on his face. "Are you still planning to stay in our Sunstrider home?" Dathrima asked. "If you allow me." Ethan flapped his wings slightly and flew up from his seat. "As I said before, I took the risk to sneak into Zinashari in order to rescue Tyrande, who was trapped in the palace. Therefore, I need a channel to enter the palace, close to the place where Tyrande is imprisoned. At the same time, I also need a helper to help me complete this rescue work." He gave Dathrima a deep look and continued, "Of course, I can understand if you are unwilling to provide me with shelter. I will leave immediately without causing you any trouble." When Dathrima heard this, a curious light flashed in his eyes. "You have said so much. Aren't you afraid that I will betray you and reveal your existence to the heroine or those demons? Among the current High Elves, I can only place my hope on your Sunstrider family," Ethan Quaya said sincerely. "If even the Sunstrider family cannot be trusted, then the entire Upper Elven society may not be trustworthy. Without the cooperation of insiders, it will be exponentially more difficult for me to complete the rescue plan. By then, I will have no choice but to send Tyrande to the rescue. The lady will stay in the palace and leave alone." Ethan noticed Dathrimar's knee-jerk reaction as he said this. He grinned slightly, seeming genuinely pleased that the Sunstrider family had such a reputation. Secretly praising Dathrimar's character, Ethan continued, "If it really comes to that point, I will choose to return to the resistance camp, fight side by side with them, and capture Aislinn as soon as possible. In this way, there may be a chance to rescue the Whispering Wind Priest, or at least avenge her." At this point, Ethan's face became solemn, and there was a hint of threat in his voice. Of course, if the situation really develops to that point, it means that the entire high-level elves in Aislinn are beyond hope. In that case, you know what action we will take. Believe me, there is nothing I, Ethan Quaya, can't do for revenge. Chapter 732, Prison Visit. Ethan's strategy was to be polite initially and then assertive. This was his negotiation style. Naturally, he couldn't just watch Tyrande face danger in the palace and then seek revenge afterward. His initial politeness was merely a negotiation tactic. Since his goal was to enlist Dathrimar's help to rescue Tyrande, it made her a bargaining chip in the opponent's hands, creating an unequal status between the two parties in this negotiation. In such an environment, Ethan needed to downplay the importance of the hostage while imposing an equal threat to the other party. He understood that a truly solid agreement could only be reached when both parties had the ability to check and balance each other. However, his negotiation methods seemed to be in vain because he misjudged the other party's concerns. "Ethan Quaya?" Dathrimar's face showed obvious shock when he heard the name. Ethan's name was now known on both sides of the war. His unique druid image and the series of heroic feats he accomplished had made his name legendary in both camps. "You can stay." Dathrimar's eyes flickered slightly. He looked down at Alils, who was sleeping peacefully on his lap. After pondering for a moment, he finally made a decision. "I only have this one precious daughter, so I sincerely hope that you will not let her down. Oh, by the way, how old are you this year?" "What do you mean, don't live up to her love? Also, why are you asking about my age?" Ethan muttered to himself, feeling a bit dumbfounded. What's going on with this attitude of entrusting your daughter to your son-in-law? Nonetheless, he made up an age and told it to Dathrimar. He drew on his own age in the Harry Potter world and converted it to the age of the Night Elves in this world, which was probably just adulthood. After hearing this, Dathrimar nodded with satisfaction and continued, Aside from temporarily providing you with shelter, I can't make any other guarantees to you now. However, if things are really as you said, maybe next time I come back, I will help you enter the pressure tube. Thank you very much for your generous help. I will wait patiently for your good news. Ethan nodded to Dathramar with gratitude. At this moment, he noticed that Elalith in Dathramar's arms began to slowly wake up. To avoid frightening the little girl, Ethan quickly changed into his original crow form and stood quietly in the room. Alice knew nothing about her previous experience of being hypnotized by Ethan. She rubbed her sleepy eyes, and upon seeing the crow in front of her, immediately screamed happily and pounced on Ethan without hesitation, completely ignoring her father's complicated expression. In the days that followed, the life of the Sunstrider family seemed to return to its former peace and harmony, as if the profound conversation between Ethan and Dathramar had never happened. Perhaps Ethan's description was too vivid and powerful, or perhaps his words really touched Dathramar's heart. Although Dathramar only said that he would provide asylum to Ethan, the day after the conversation, he gave Shiwendai an unexpected surprise. Since rejecting Ashara's invitation in person last time, Tarandi's situation had declined sharply, and her treatment was not as good as before. She was originally under house arrest in a magnificent palace, but now she didn't even have that kind of treatment, and was imprisoned in a dark and damp dungeon of the palace. However, no matter how the environment changed, Tyran's tenacious will remained the same and never wavered. As time passed, hunger began to gnaw at Tyrande's body like a wild beast. This was not a good sign. The moon goddess Elune had provided her with nourishment for a long time, but there were so many creatures on the continent of Kalimdor that all needed the goddess's protection, and she could not devote too much power to one priestess. Ethan knew this very well and did not see it as a betrayal by the moon goddess. He had no complaints. Instead, he was grateful for everything Elune had done for him. She understood that now was the time to test her frail body, but fortunately, the practice of the sisterhood had laid a solid foundation for her, enough to support her through this difficult time. Whenever the sun set and twilight deepened, an upper elf guard would bring a bowl of thin porridge. The bowl was usually placed haphazardly in the corner of the cell, but Tyran never touched it. In addition to adhering to the integrity of not eating Josu, part of the reason was that she suspected the gruel in the bowl was the enemy's leftovers used to humiliate her dignity. As Elune's chosen one, even for the dignity of the moon goddess, she would rather choose hunger than bow to humiliation. In fact, if Tyrande revealed even a hint to the Highborn that she was hungry, the impenetrable doors of the arcane prison would be partially lifted. In this way, the milky white exquisite tableware could carry the meal through the arcane barrier and reach her hands. The conditions sounded great, but what happened next made Tyrande even more grateful for her choice. Tyrande couldn't help but feel scared every time she thought about Ms. Vashj trying to poison her food, trying to kill her, and she was glad that she had never touched any food. However, this did not change the fact that Tyrande was starving. In her eyes at this time, the cold and condensed food in the bowl exuded an alluring aroma. It was not only delicious food that could satisfy her hunger, but also the hope of life. The common sense of the priestess told her that with just one bite, she would be able to absorb enough nutrients to support her through another difficult day. If she could take the full bowl of food into her belly, she would be able to get enough nutrition to survive a week or even longer. However, she was too weak. Under the current situation, eating alone had become a luxury without the help of others. Now she was so weak that she needed to be fed. But she didn't want to show her weak side to others because that would undoubtedly become a weakness that the devils could exploit. At this moment, the sound of the cell door being unlocked broke the silence. Tyrande quickly looked away from the rice bowl on the ground. She didn't want anyone to notice her declining physical condition. An expressionless guard opened the door, and then an upper elf walked in. This elf was a stranger to Tyrande, and his gleaming robes were particularly eye-catching in the dim dungeon. He was obviously very proud of his handsome appearance, and he walked confidently and calmly with every step. Unlike other thin upper elves, his body was strong and powerful, with clear muscle lines. The most attractive thing was his light purple skin, which exuded a mysterious luster in the dark dungeon, especially his long golden hair, which would shine dazzlingly in the sun. Tyrande had never seen such a unique hair color before, and she couldn't help but look at it a few more times. However, like all highborn elves, he also had an innate look of arrogance on his face. This arrogance was even more apparent when talking to the guards, as if his every word and deed were unquestionable orders. "Back off," he said to the guard calmly. The guard looked respectful in front of this mage. With this mage present, he was eager to leave as soon as possible. He quickly locked the cell door, then turned around and strode away without any hesitation. "Holy Priestess," the highborn greeted her in a relatively gentle tone, in sharp contrast to the arrogant orders he had given the guards before. "You can actually make your life more comfortable." Tyrande responded without hesitation, "I am content with the comfort of the moon goddess. I neither need nor desire other worldly enjoyments." Upon hearing this, the upper elf's facial expression changed. Tyrande keenly caught a look of regret flashing in his eyes, as if he felt he shouldn't have spoken as he just did. She could sense the kindness he was trying to convey, which surprised her. She had originally thought that all highborn elves had become pawns of the demon leader in Azshara, but the elf in front of her made her see different possibilities. "Priestess," he began, but she interrupted gently, trying to be more friendly. "You can just call me Tyrande," she said softly. "Tyrande Whisperwind." "Miss Tyrande, I am Dathramar Sunstrider," the highborn elf replied, his voice devoid of any arrogance. "I am the 20th generation noble of the Empress." "A hereditary family with a long history," Tyrande acknowledged at the right moment. "You do have reason to be proud of it." Chapter 733, Feeding Play and Double Act. During his brief relationship with Tyrande, Ethan gradually discovered the differences between her and the Night Elf High Priest described in the original work. Perhaps because she is still young, or perhaps because she has not yet been deeply influenced by Malfurion, Tyrande Whisperwind at this time is not the kind of pedantic person one might expect. Instead, she is a very smart girl who shows a different style. When dealing with various matters, she can always respond flexibly, and her skill is amazing. However, she also has an obvious shortcoming. When she feels that there is a trustworthy man around her who she can rely on, she will not hesitate to curb her independence and rely on him wholeheartedly. In the original book, when Malfurion fell into a deep sleep, she was the only one among the Night Elves who stood strong. But when Malfurion woke up, she immediately changed from a strong woman to a more submissive one. Now, as she spends time with Ethan, she has developed deep trust and reliance on him. However, when danger comes and she is alone in facing it, Tyrande can quickly change roles, showing amazing courage and wisdom. For example, at this moment, after feeling the unique kindness of Dathramar, Tyrande immediately adjusted her attitude towards the upper elf, and her words became friendly and cordial. It seemed as though she had completely ignored the harsh words and arrogance of the other party before. Arrogance and words have never disgusted the High Elves. "Indeed, I am deeply proud," Dathramar said softly, but an elusive gloom flashed across his face. "I have enough reasons to be proud," he affirmed again. Through Dathramar's soliloquy, Tyrande keenly captured the complex emotions behind his words. She realized that this was an opportunity to understand the other person's heart deeply, and it might also be beneficial to herself. So, she said in a tone that was both flattering and reminding, "The highborn elves have been the noble guardians of this kingdom since ancient times, defending our people and the sacred well of eternity. I firmly believe that if your ancestors knew what you are doing today, they would be proud of you and not disappointed." After hearing this, a trace of gloom flashed across Dathramar's face again, but he quickly changed the topic, trying to hide his true emotions. "I came here mainly to see if you need to eat, distinguished priestess." He took out a lunchbox from his arms with concern in his voice. "I wanted to bring you more food, but unfortunately, they only allowed me to carry these." Tyrande smiled slightly, expressing gratitude, but still refused vigilantly. "I appreciate your kindness, Dathramar, but I don't feel hungry now." I understand your concerns. After all, this place is full of unknowns and dangers. Dathramar looked at her sincerely. But please believe me, there is absolutely no poison in the food in this bowl. I promise you on my honor, it's safe and harmless. But the priestess shook her head firmly and refused. Dathramar eagerly tried to persuade Tyrande, but seeing her stubborn and determined expression, he finally chose to give up. After suddenly looking around to make sure no one was watching them, he mysteriously said something that confused Tyrande. Okay, I admit defeat. I really can't do anything to Miss Tyrande, so you should persuade her yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, Tyrande was surprised to see Dathramar's pocket move slightly. Then a small snake crawled out of it. The snake opened its mouth and made a human sound. It was unbelievable. I don't know how its mouth and throat made such a sound, Tyrande thought. What, you changed your mind and are willing to let me show up, Dathramar? The little snake hissed. Although its voice was mixed with hisses, the words were still clearly audible. Didn't you still think it was too risky for me to talk to Tyrande in person? I'm just worried that Miss Tyrande won't. Dathrama turned her head awkwardly and said in an unnatural tone, for her health, it's worth taking a little risk. Ha ha, the little snake hissed, showing disapproval. It was surprising to see Dathrama, a grown and noble man, acting like a tsundere. By this time, if Tyrande still couldn't see through the little snake's true identity, she would be too slow. She suddenly rushed to the railing of the cell, her eyes locked on the little snake in front of her, and asked with a hint of disbelief, Ethan, is that you? Ethan? Of course, Tyrande. The little snake raised his head slightly and replied with a hiss, Who else but me can overcome all the dangers to save you now? Hearing this familiar and friendly voice, Tyrande's heart finally settled. Her mouth tightened, her eyes instantly became moist, and her previous alertness and strength disappeared. Great, Ethan, you finally came to me. I thought you had forgotten me. Her voice trembled, filled with emotion and dependence. At this moment, Tyrande completely shed the strong shell of the priestess, revealing her softness and vulnerability as an ordinary girl. She longed to pass through the arcane barrier, reach out her hand, and gently touch Ethan, feeling the long-lost warmth and comfort. Ethan and Tyrande immediately began to reminisce about old times, though it was mainly Tyrande who was talking, while Ethan listened quietly with a warm smile. Tyrande couldn't wait to tell Ethan every encounter and grievance she had experienced during this period, as if she wanted to fill up all the lost time. However, this heartwarming scene made Dathrama frown, and the sense of urgency in his heart grew stronger. Please pay attention, Mr. Ethan, he reminded in a deep voice. I obtained this opportunity to visit the prison on the pretext of asking Miss Tyrande for internal information about the rebels before going on a mission. Our time is very limited. Ethan nodded slightly and expressed his understanding to Dathrama. I understand, Dathrama. I will make good use of the time. He then turned to the priestess. Tyrande, you heard him. We don't have much time. Eat something first to fill your stomach, and we will chat while you eat. As he spoke, he gently arched his snake head and carefully pushed the bowl brought by Dathrama towards Tyrande. Tyrande had doubts about Dathrama, but she had complete trust in Ethan. She nodded obediently. Okay, I'll eat. As if sensing her wishes, the arcane barrier immediately responded and slowly opened a small opening, just enough for her to eat. If Tyrande hadn't been focusing on the food, she might have noticed that Ethan was staring at the barrier in front of him, as if deep in thought. Based on the information provided by Dathrama, Ethan already knew that the dungeons of this elven palace were not ordinary cells, but used advanced arcane magic to imprison criminals. An important purpose of his visit was to explore the structure of this arcane prison and see if there was a way to crack it. Otherwise, he would have to find a way to steal the key to the cell from Vashj. And Vashj was not only the chief maid of Ashara, but also a powerful individual. This task was much more difficult than the prison break itself. Tyrande was still trying to eat. She tried several times but found that the small hole left in the barrier was too narrow, making it difficult for even one hand to pass through, let alone take the whole food lamp in. In desperation, she turned to Ethan and asked softly, Hey, you look so absorbed. What are you thinking about? Ethan noticed Tyrande's predicament. He shook his head slightly and then decisively changed back to his human form. He scooped up a full spoonful of food with his own hands and carefully handed it to Tehran's mouth. He noticed that when the spoon passed through the gap in the magic barrier, it shone with a faint light. A faint light illuminated the room. Clearly, the mage who designed this arcane barrier had put a lot of thought into it. Even though there were gaps in the barrier, only certain objects could pass through, and even then, it was mighted. You have to lean forward a little, Ethan reminded her softly. I can't get my hands through this barrier. The priestess gently leaned forward, allowing Ethan to feed her through the small hole. She savored the delicacies he offered, each bite revealing the care and effort he had put into the meal. After just a few bites, she noticed something different. This is the meal you cooked yourself, isn't it? She asked, looking at Ethan in surprise. In his pursuit of Tyrande, Ethan had employed many modern techniques, including the popular method among time travelers, using the charm of delicious food. He made full use of the unique cooking skills and food culture from Blue Star to make every dish unforgettable, much to Tyrande's satisfaction. This unique taste could not be imitated by others. However, what moved Tyrande even more was that she tasted Ethan's special magic berries in this bowl of rice. Magic Berry Technique, a level 1 druid spell that injects the power of nature into berries, turning them into magical berries with healing powers. Another purpose of Ethan's visit was to find a way to help Tyrande recuperate after her many days of hunger strike. While a simple dietary supplement could provide some nourishment, it couldn't compare to the recovery effects produced by magic. However, in the palace, any sudden magical fluctuations could cause unnecessary trouble. Therefore, using magic to restore Tyrande's condition could easily attract unwanted attention from the palace guards. In this situation, the magic berries prepared in advance by druid spells were the best tonic for Tyrande. It is worth mentioning that the magic berry spell was not a spell of the native druids of Azeroth, but a secret skill unique to Ethan. Tyrande had tasted the magic berries before and still remembered their unique flavor. In the past, she thought the taste of magic berries was ordinary, but today, the same taste took on a new charm in her mouth, making her feel cherished and touched. Chapter 734, Guarantee from the Moon God Priest. I have the opportunity to visit you this time, thanks to Dathramar's assistance. Ethan carefully fed Tyrande while explaining the current situation. Please believe me, I will do my best to save you. However, today is not the time yet. The main reason I came here today is to familiarize myself with the environment and prepare for future rescues. It also gives you a chance to recover. Additionally, Mr. Dathramar has his own considerations. After learning that you are Elun's chosen one, he hopes to have a face-to-face conversation with you to decide whether to join our subsequent rescue plan. Thank you, Mr. Dathramar. With Ethan's endorsement, Tyrande became less suspicious of Dathramar. She turned to him, gratitude shining in her eyes, and said sincerely, Mr. Dathramar, thank you very much. Regardless of whether you choose to help me in the end, I will remember your kindness and assistance during this time. Miss Tyrande, you are too polite, Dathramar replied, shaking his head with a wry smile. To be honest, your companions threatened me yesterday. If I don't cooperate, they will attack me when the army invades. They are trying to settle accounts with us. Tyrande's eyes widened upon hearing this. She glanced at Ethan with a reproachful look and pouted in mock anger. Ethan, how could you speak to Mr. Dathramar like this? But Ethan could tell that her eyes were almost watering, clearly moved by his efforts. He shook his head slightly and said cooperatively, It's true, I said the wrong thing, Dathramar. I apologize to you. I hope you can understand our urgency and worry. It's okay, Mr. Ethan. I don't mind those little misunderstandings anymore. Dathramar accepted the somewhat perfunctory apology. Then he turned to Tyrande and asked curiously, Miss Tyrande, actually, as long as you give up resistance and surrender to Her Majesty the Queen, everything will become much simpler. Being loyal to Her Majesty the Queen is not a shameful thing. Otherwise, if the Queen loses interest in you, I am really worried that your situation will become very dangerous. So, what is the reason you still persist in such a difficult situation? With this question raised, Dathramar's investigation of Tyrande also quietly began. He made this decision not on a whim, but after careful consideration. As we all know, in the society of the lower elves, the people who believe in the moon god Elune account for an overwhelming majority. As the representative organization of this faith, the Sisters of Elune have such a profound influence among the common people that they can compete with the royal power. As for Tyrande, as the chosen one of the moon god, her noble and special status is naturally extraordinary. Looking back on the long history, for hundreds of years, there were no rumors of Elune's chosen in the entire Dark Knight Empire. However, it is an unquestionable fact that Tyrande is protected by the moon god. This is the key to her ability to stand firm in a dangerous environment surrounded by powerful enemies. From this, it is not difficult to predict that as long as Tyrande can move forward steadily and not deviate from her path, she will eventually become the leader of the Sisters of Elune, leading the Night Elves who believe in the moon god to new glory. For Dathramar, choosing to participate in the operation to save Tyrande would mean a major shift in the position of the Sunstrider family in this complicated war. This is undoubtedly a big gamble, betting on the future and destiny of the Sunstrider family. Therefore, before taking this decisive step, Dathramar must carefully observe and evaluate the side he is prepared to join. He needs to have a deep understanding of their future leadership core. What qualities and abilities do those who are about to become senior leaders possess? Are their values and vision consistent with the Sunstrider family? All these factors must be considered by Dathramar, that must be carefully considered before making a choice. I can't be up to the expectations of the moon goddess, Tyrande said, having calmed down from the excitement of meeting Ethan for the first time. She regained her former calmness and rationality. Aware of the other party's considerations, she responded in a polite but firm tone. Thank you very much for your concern, Dathrima. In this indifferent palace, it is truly refreshing to meet a kind person like you. I feel so warm. After hearing this, Dathrima became arrogant again. She turned her head silently and looked into the distance. Actually, there are many people like me here, but we all know our position and situation and dare not reveal the voice of our hearts easily. He started to struggle. Ethan's voice suddenly sounded in Tyrande's heart. I can feel that he obviously has conflicts and self-doubt in his heart. It's time to apply further pressure. Tyrande had seen Ethan's ability before, so she did not make a fuss. Instead, following Ethan's prompts, she reminded Dathrima slightly aggressively, "But your loyalty to the Queen is unquestionable." Of course. There was a hint of offended anger in the words of the head of the Sunchaser family, but he quickly calmed down and continued. However, what we are deeply worried about is her current judgment, which seems somewhat abnormal. We know all about the Well of Eternity and the power it contains, but she turns a deaf ear to our advice and instead adopts the advice of outsiders. We once put down everything we were doing and tried our best to introduce the leader of the Burning Legion into this world. We once worked hard for countless glories, and He suddenly paused and stopped talking. Dathrima realized that his words were a bit too fierce, and he had actually lost his composure after a few simple words from the other party. At the same time, Ethan continued to feed Tyrande calmly. The room suddenly fell into silence, with only the sound of Tyrande chewing slowly echoing in the air. Unconsciously, the food in the bowl had been swept away. Ethan gently put the rice bowl back in place and then asked Tyrande gently, "Would you like some water?" The priestess nodded slightly in agreement. So, Ethan took a bottle of water and carefully poured it into the bowl. Then he scooped up a spoonful of water and gently brought it to her mouth, just as he did when feeding her. Tyrande took a few sips of water, then turned to Dathrima and started a new topic. "It must feel strange to work with satyrs, right? After all, they were once just like us. I have to admit that their existence does make me a little uneasy." Dathrima immediately replied, "They are all lucky ones chosen by fate. Sargeras's power has allowed them to ascend, making them more suitable to serve him than us." These words seemed to have been tempered countless times and were as smooth as flowing water. The priestess couldn't help but wonder whether Dathrima had repeated these words in her heart thousands of times, and even murmured them to herself when she was alone. This is also understandable, considering their immediate bosses were all satyrs transformed from the original night elves. Tyrande pressed on. What about you? Were you not chosen? When Dathrima heard this question, he naturally understood why the other party asked such a sensitive question. This was not just Tyrande asking out of curiosity, it was also a test. Just as he was testing Tyrande, she was testing him in the same way. As a result, his eyes became much firmer, and he said sincerely, I was indeed proposed, but I refused. The proposal was very tempting, but I always believed that my first duty was to be loyal to the queen. I didn't want to, and I refused to be one of them. Tyrande turned her eyes to Ethan, who nodded slightly, indicating to her that Dathrima's words were sincere. So, Tyrande smiled at Dathrimar. I am Elun's listener, Dathrimar. If you have something in your heart that you want to talk about, I will be an excellent listener. Your secret will be absolutely safe here. Please trust me. Of course. Estes, Dathrimar promised earnestly. After another 2 minutes, the last bowl of water was finished. Okay, Ethan, Dathrimar said, seeing that Tyrande was full of food and drink. We must leave now. If we stay here too long, we will arouse the vigilance of the guards. Well, goodbye, Tyrande, Ethan responded. His body began to change, gradually shrinking and meandering until he returned to the form of a small snake. He crawled lightly back into Dathrimar's pocket. Tyrande's eyes showed reluctance, and they were slightly moist. Ethan comforted her gently. Be patient, Tyrande. Just wait a few more days, and I will come back and take you away. You must also be careful in the enemy camp, Tyrande warned with concern. Take care of yourself outside. May the blessing of the moon goddess be with you forever. Then she turned her gaze to Dathrimar and said sincerely, The moon goddess's blessing will also protect you, Dathrimar. Dathrimar nodded quickly, then turned and left. Tyrande listened quietly to his footsteps fading away, her heart filled with expectation and determination. She was ready, waiting for the guards' return and routine inspection. However, when the guards came back, they just stood guard outside the door as usual and did not question her too much. At that moment, for the first time since being captured, Tyrande Whisperwind had a real smile on her face. Chapter 735, Negotiation. From Ethan's perspective, this meeting was undoubtedly a complete and successful one. Dathrimar not only witnessed the elegance of Tyrande, Elun's chosen one, but was also deeply satisfied with her pious heart, unwavering faith, and profound compassion. More importantly, in the name of the Sisters of Elun, Tyrande made a solemn promise to Dathrimar that the sisters would warmly welcome with open arms those high-born elves who were willing to set things right and return to the right path. This undoubtedly reassured Dathrimar. Before leaving Aislinn and embarking on his mission to the rebels, Dathrimar took the initiative to ask Ethan if he needed to send any news or letters to the rebels. When Ethan heard this, his heart stirred. He did have an important message to deliver to the resistance, so he quickly wrote a letter and solemnly handed it to Dathrimar, repeatedly instructing him to deliver the letter to Malfurion or Jared privately and safely. In the frontline barracks of the resistance army, the atmosphere was tense and solemn. The high-ranking generals, led by Jared, sat upright, facing the brightly dressed delegation of upper elves opposite them. The leader of the delegation was a blonde night elf wearing a bright red robe. He behaved elegantly and greeted Jared and the others with the unique etiquette of a noble. Dear General Jared and other generals, I am deeply honored to meet with you, Dathrimar Sunstrider said in a loud and clear voice. On behalf of Her Majesty Queen Ashara, I sincerely hope to discuss with you how to end this meaningless war and jointly create peace between us. However, as soon as he finished speaking, a female high elf officer on Jared's left couldn't help but sneer. Her eyes flashed with blazing hatred as she stared at Dathrimar closely, her tone full of disdain. Peace, Mr. Sunstrider? Are you kidding me? The queen who invited demons and massacred our people now wants peace? She even sent people to assassinate Kuda, the Lord of Black Crow Castle, who was determined to drive out demons as King Kin. Lost Ravencrest. Can such behavior be called seeking peace? Bang! Speaking in her excitement, she slammed the table and stood up, her voice full of anger and grief. Don't joke about peace. If you really want peace, first hand over those despicable people who are plotting assassinations. I will make them pay with blood. Elisana, Gerard called softly. He stood up at the same time, walked to her side, and patted her shoulder gently. Take a deep breath and relax. The sacrifice of Lord Ravencrest is something each of us resistance fighters will remember in our hearts. But now, let us calm down and listen to what Mr. Sunstrider has to say. Dathramar stared at the beautiful lady in front of him, who was trembling with anger, and he couldn't help but feel sympathy in his heart. If I guess correctly, you are the daughter of Lord Ravencrest, right? I, Dathramar Sunstrider, on behalf of my family, would like to express my deepest condolences for your father's tragic loss. Lord Ravencrest was not only an outstanding noble, but also a hero in the hearts of many highborn elves in Zin-Azshari. His death indeed makes people feel endless regret. At this point, he shook his head helplessly. However, the Queen's order, that is something we cannot change. As ministers, we can only obey. Humph. Elisana snorted coldly, but her mood had obviously calmed down. With Dathramar's sincere condolences and Gerard's comfort, she finally began to control her emotions. Although her face was still as gloomy as water, at least she didn't lose control again. Gently patting Elisana's shoulder, Gerard comforted the descendant of Ravencrest in a gentle tone and motioned for her to sit down. Then, his eyes turned to Dathramar, and his tone became serious. Mr. Sunstrider, what happened to Lord Ravencrest is not an isolated incident. Prince Farodis of Asuna also caused trouble for the Queen. The demons expressed there of the resistance army displayed a stark contrast. Their dedication and resolve were palpable, and it was clear that they were driven by a higher purpose. Dathrema took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. I understand your concerns and the gravity of the situation, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. I will ensure that your messages and demands are conveyed to Her Majesty. It is imperative that we find a way to bridge this divide and restore peace to our land. Gerard nodded, his expression softening slightly. We appreciate your willingness to listen, Mr. Sunchaser, but words alone will not suffice. Actions must follow, and they must be genuine. Maiev, standing resolute beside her brother, added, The Sisters of Elune will continue to stand firm in our beliefs. We will not waver until the threat of the demons is eradicated and our people are safe once more. Elisana, representing the Ravencrest family and other upper elves, stepped forward. We all share a common goal, the prosperity and safety of the Dark Knight Empire. But this cannot be achieved through tyranny and the summoning of dark forces. We must return to the principles that once made our empire great. Dathrema felt the weight of their words and the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he also recognized the necessity of finding a resolution. I will do everything in my power to advocate for a peaceful solution, he promised. Let us hope that reason and goodwill will prevail. With that, the meeting concluded, leaving Dathrema to ponder the difficult task ahead. The resistance leaders had made their positions clear, and it was now up to him to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy and bring their concerns to Queen Azshara. The future of the Dark Knight Empire hung in the balance, and the choices made in the coming days would determine its fate. The resistance in front of them seemed to possess a stronger will and a greater sense of unity. Compared to the high-class elves who claimed nobility, these rebels appeared more like a faction committed to justice and morality. The original intention and ultimate goal of the resistance was never to rebel or subvert, but to expel the burning legion that brought chaos and disaster to the world. Such a reason seemed just and noble. In comparison, those upper elves who considered themselves superior appeared selfish, almost like the true villains. This realization made Dathrema even more reluctant to associate with them, and he began to feel truly shaken deep in his heart. The slogans that had been effective throughout history, pacifying the situation, clearing the emperor's side, respecting the king, fighting against the barbarians, expelling the Tartars, still seemed to hold irresistible power in the Night Elf society of Otherworld. I have deeply felt your determination and attitude, Dathrema said, after the deputy behind him softly reminded him. He took a deep breath and continued, I will convey your views and demands to the Queen intact. I hope. Sorry, I came back a little late. A sudden voice interrupted Dathrema's words. The curtain of the camp tent was gently opened, and a figure walked in. It was Malfurion, who had just returned from the front line, his face full of exhaustion. Chapter 736. A Secret Message Belonging to the Druid. Archdruid Malfurion, as a senior member of the Resistance, should have been in this tent long ago to participate in the negotiation. He was late because he was too busy. However, it is fair to say that his busyness was self-inflicted. Recently, the loss of Tyrande had been gnawing at his heart. To dispel the anxiety and prevent himself from overthinking, he devoted himself almost endlessly to the battlefield, trying to use fighting to fill the emptiness and relieve his growing anxiety. Upon seeing this, Jared immediately introduced both parties. Mr. Sunstrider, please allow me to introduce you to the leader of the Druid sect, the highly respected Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage. Dathrema narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Malfurion. The strong country atmosphere exuding from him made Dathrema, who was accustomed to the refinement and respectability of nobles, feel a little uncomfortable. At the same time, Malfurion felt an inexplicable resistance to the unnatural, arcane energy lingering around Dathremar. In his opinion, the arcane energy drawn from the Well of Eternity seemed to have lost its original purity after being corrupted by the Burning Legion. This was very different from the original arcane energy. However, both of them were extremely well educated, and their inner rejection was not shown on their faces. Malfurion nodded slightly to Dathrema, but his casual gesture only deepened Dathrema's displeasure. The ensuing negotiations were lengthy and cumbersome, full of diplomatic rhetoric and back-and-forth chatter. Representatives from both sides held their own opinions. On the surface, they seemed friendly, but there was a hidden edge in their words. In short, the upper elves and the rebels had a cordial and friendly conversation, fully exchanged opinions, and enhanced their understanding. When the negotiation finally ended and the tired parties were preparing to leave, Malfurion suddenly turned around and said to Dathrema, "Mr. Sunstrider, can you lend me a moment to speak?" Dathrema glanced at him in surprise, then nodded cheerfully. "Of course, I also have some things that I want to communicate privately with Mr. Malfurion." This scene was keenly captured by Jared Shadowsong, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. As the leader of the Resistance, Jared's observation skills were sharp. During the negotiation, he had already noticed that Dathremar and Malfurion seemed to dislike each other. However, he was surprised that these two, who had been secretly competing with each other, now turned around to meet for a private conversation. This dramatic turn was truly amazing. But the Highborn Elves mission was originally established by Dathrema, and the members of the team were all his capable officers, so there were naturally no objections to his decision. Malfurion was also one of the top leaders of the Resistance, and the only channel for the Resistance to communicate with the demigods. No one in the Resistance wanted to offend him. Therefore, when the two asked to talk privately, everyone else in the tent wisely chose to leave. Soon, only Malfurion and Dathrema were left in the tent. Seeing that everyone had left, Malfurion asked directly, "I want to ask you about someone." Dathrema raised his eyebrows slightly, recalling a piece of information he had recently received, then raised an imperceptible arc at the corner of his mouth and said slowly, "Archdruid, if you want to ask about Tyrande, regarding the situation of High Priest Fung, I can tell you that she is still imprisoned in the palace by the Queen. At least she has not been harmed yet." "No, I'm not asking about her." Malfurion shook his head, denying Dathrema's guess. "What I want to know is, have you heard any rumors in Zinashari recently? For example, about strange animals and plants that have never been seen before?" "Huh? It sounds like they're all caused by druid spells." When Dathrema heard this, the formulaic smile on his face gradually faded. He looked at Malfurion seriously and asked, "So, you probably want to ask me about a druid. I guess you want to ask about Ethan Quaya, right?" Malfurion's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this, and he asked eagerly, "Exactly. It seems that you really know him? Can you tell me the latest news about him?" "Then you've asked the right person. Regarding Ethan Quaya, I'm afraid no one in the entire Aesolin knows more about him than I do." Dathrema nodded and said in a deep voice, "He is in the middle of nowhere. When he entered the city a few months ago, he was unfortunately injured by Archimond. To avoid pursuit, he had to transform into an ordinary crow and hide in my house to recover from his injuries. As far as I know, his injuries should have almost healed by now. Malfurion's face instantly turned pale upon hearing that Ethan had been injured by Archimond himself. He recalled the evil energy ray that pierced the sky like an alien object half a month ago, a terrifying mark left by Archimond's power. Fortunately, Dathrema confirmed that Ethan was still safe and sound, which brought Malfurion a sense of relief. He breathed a long sigh of relief. When he learned that Dathrema had protected Ethan, his view of this highborn noble suddenly changed. In his eyes, Dathrema was no longer the annoying nobleman, but a man with a broad mind and loyalty. After all, Malfurion was an honest man. No matter how much he regarded Ethan as his love rival, he had to admit that Ethan took a big risk by entering the enemy camp to rescue Tyrande, a level of bravery even greater than Tyrande herself. Even though Malfurion knew that Ethan's intentions were not entirely pure, he still believed that Ethan had done something that even he himself did not dare to do. Therefore, he felt a debt of gratitude to Ethan. "Mr. Dathrema, I thank you from the bottom of my heart." Malfurion's voice was full of sincerity. "Thank you for your willingness to lend a helping hand to him in this critical moment." "Where?" Dathrema heard this, but he just shook his head gently, with a bit of indignation in his eyes. "No, you don't have to thank me, Malfurion. I'm not doing this completely out of selflessness. What those demons did was truly heinous. I couldn't sit back and watch." Having said this, he seemed a little excited and couldn't help but confide his difficulties to Malfurion. In fact, this negotiation was just wishful thinking on my part from beginning to end. The Queen and most of the upper elves were all opposed to it, believing that dealing with demons is a sign of weakness. "I sincerely thank you for your candidness. I have deeply understood this sincerity." Malfurion nodded slightly and said while thinking, "If this negotiation really gets widespread support, we may be able to obtain more favorable conditions so as not to leave empty-handed." "Ah, I almost forgot." The two chatted for a while, and Dathrema suddenly patted his thigh and said suddenly, "Before I left, Ethan specifically asked me to forward a letter to you privately." As he spoke, he reached out and took out a letter from his pocket, carefully handing it to Malfurion. Malfurion took the letter. It was more like a thin leaf than a letter. However, this was not just an ordinary leaf. Malfurion could feel the subtle power of nature contained in it. Although this power was weak, it resonated harmoniously with the surrounding natural environment. Malfurion understood immediately and slowly injected his natural power into the leaf. The next moment, he could see that the leaf seemed to sense the infusion of power, and the leaf veins began to slowly squirm, growing abnormally at a speed visible to the naked eye, gradually outlining regular patterns. Upon closer inspection, Ethan realized that the patterns were actually Darnassian letters of the Night Elves, forming the content of a secret message. In this way, Ethan created a letter that only druids could decipher. Even if such a letter were discovered by a demon, it would be dismissed as 10 ordinary leaves. As everyone knows, druids only exist among the resistance. Therefore, this new type of secret message almost completely eliminates the possibility of being discovered. Ethan's wisdom and creativity are truly remarkable. I must find a way to promote this within the military, Malfurion praised sincerely. At this moment, he was completely convinced that this letter was indeed written by Ethan. After all, creating such a secret message requires superb control over the power of nature. Who else but Ethan could control the forces of nature so exquisitely? At least among the upper-class elves and demons in Isolin, no one could reach such a state. Next, Malfurion carefully unfolded the secret letter in his hand and read it word for word. In the letter, Ethan's handwriting was vigorous and powerful. He elaborated on his plans and requirements, urging the rebels to launch a swift and threatening attack on the Burning Legion's positions at the specified time. The purpose of this offensive was not just to achieve military victory, but more importantly, to mobilize the power of the Burning Legion in Asaline City. Ideally, this would lure away Archimond, the powerful demon lord. Ethan himself would use this opportunity to create chaos in the city and look for chances to rescue the trapped Tyrande. Additionally, Ethan specifically mentioned the importance of Dathrimar. He stated that Dathrimar's help was crucial for the successful rescue of Tyrande. At the same time, he appreciated Dathrimar as a rare leader of the Lord Harmony faction among the Upper Elves, who was willing to advocate for them from the standpoint of civilians. Therefore, he implored Malfurion to win over this important ally at all costs. Chapter 737, Family Meeting. After Malfurion read the secret letter, he already had a plan in mind. He raised his head and met Dathrimar's curious gaze. "What is said in the letter?" Dathrimar couldn't help but ask. "If you need my help in bringing the letter to Ethan, I can also help." "No, there is no need for a secret message. I don't have that much information to convey." Malfurion smiled and shook his head. "You just need to bring him a message for me." "Okay, no problem," Dathrimar nodded. "What do you want to tell him?" "Tell him." Malfurion's eyes flashed with determination. "I will follow his plan and cooperate with his actions on time. We will definitely succeed." Seeing Dathrimar intending to leave, Malfurion moved in his heart and said sincerely, "Mr. Dathrimar, please don't worry. The ultimate goal of our resistance army is always to expel the demons that have invaded our homeland. We will welcome with open arms any compatriot who is willing to join us and fight together, even high elves who are born into noble families." When Dathrimar heard this, a trace of emotion flashed in his eyes. He nodded solemnly and said, "Thank you for your understanding and acceptance, Mr. Malfurion. I understand what you mean. I also felt the sincerity of the resistance." After that, he was ready to leave the resistance camp. However, when he turned around, Malfurion called him, "Mr. Dathrimar, please wait a moment." Malfurion led Dathrimar towards the front line, where many demigods gathered. Surrounded by them, a tall figure stood out. It was Cenarius. "Lord Cenarius," Malfurion saluted respectfully, "this is Mr. Dathrimar. He is interested in understanding our resistance cause." As a member of the Night Elves, Dathrimar had certainly heard of the reputation of these demigods, but seeing them with his own eyes now still shocked him. Cenarius nodded, looking at Dathrimar with his wise eyes. Under his arrangement, several demigods also had a cordial conversation with Dathrimar, which made him feel flattered. In this way, Malfurion successfully demonstrated the strength and goodwill of the resistance to Dathrimar. After receiving Malfurion's clear support, the weight in Dathrimar's heart finally lifted. He made up his mind to leave the gradually declining Upper Elf society, abandon the doomed ship, and join the hopeful resistance army. When he told his family about his decision, his wife and children had different reactions. Both his children agreed with this decision. "It should have been like this a long time ago, father," his son Keleb said, his blood boiling. He waved his fist excitedly and added, "I have never been able to understand what those demons are doing. I don't understand why we have to beg for help from the Burning Legion. They came to slaughter our fellow citizens." "Brother is right." His daughter Elise also expressed her support without hesitation. "I have also heard about the atrocities of those demons who killed countless innocent lives. Such behavior is really disturbing. I hate it. However, is it too risky for us to do this?" Mrs. Sunchaser's eyebrows showed deep worry. "If the matter is exposed, those demons will never let us go. Our lives will be at stake. But do you think that if you continue to associate with the demons and follow them all the way to the dark side, you will really be safe and worry-free?" Dathrimar gently held his wife's hand and shook his head. "When I was on a mission to the rebels, I carefully observed their team. They were not a ragtag army, but an army with strict organization and lofty ideals. More importantly, almost all the legendary demigods stood with them. This means that they do have enough power to compete with the demons, and their possibility of success is not small." He sighed. "If we don't make changes now, do you think we will have a good ending when the resistance forces conquer Aesolin? How will those demigods and resistance forces view those of us who were once noblemen in cahoots with the demons? With the devil?" Dathrimar pondered. In truth, what truly influenced his decision wasn't the persuasive words of Malfurion and Tyrande, but the formidable strength displayed by the resistance army and the demigods. This is the harsh reality. For these high elf nobles, morality and justice are easily disregarded. Only true power can impress them. However, before we decide to formally defect to the rebels, no, it should be said, join the rebels, we must be fully prepared. Dathramar stated after discussing the choice with his wife and children. We need to prepare for the rebels. We should establish a solid escape route, such as transferring our property in advance and sending it outside the city of Aislinn. This way, if we need to evacuate quickly, we will have sufficient resources to get back on our feet. By the way, Dathramar suddenly remembered something and turned to his youngest daughter, Eily Lacey. My daughter, you also need to leave Aislinn in advance. When Eily heard she was to leave her family, her eyes filled with confusion and dissatisfaction. Why, Dad? I want to be with you. Don't be willful, Eily. Be obedient. Mrs. Sunseeker immediately understood her husband's intentions and softly comforted her. What your father and I are going to do is full of dangers. You are still too young to stay in this turbulent city. We cannot ensure your safety here. But, Eily's lips trembled slightly, and her eyes began to redden. She muttered, I don't want to leave you. Dathramar looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes, feeling a twinge of pain in his heart. But for the sake of his family and his daughter, he had to stand firm. He sighed, then leaned down and said gently but firmly, Eily, my dear, you must leave Aislinn. This way, even if we encounter unexpected events, the bloodline of the Sunstrider family will not be cut off. At that time, our friends in the rebel army will also protect you for the sake of our contribution to the common cause. Eily sobbed, her voice choked. But I am also a member of the Sunstrider family. I want to do my part for our family. Dathramar gently wiped away the tears on his daughter's face and said softly, Your safe departure from Aislinn is the greatest help you can give us. Your safety is of immense importance to us. He paused, sensing that his words might seem too cold, and added, Eily, the key to this war lies in the Well of Eternity in the city. I predict that no matter the outcome, Aislinn may turn into ruins. Therefore, I ask you to leave not only to avoid danger, but also to shoulder the important task of finding a new home for our family. These words had an immediate impact. Eily gradually stopped crying and looked up at her father. Build a new home? Will our home in Zin Aislinn be destroyed? Then where should we go? Not only Eily, but this question also lingered in the mind of Mrs. Sunstrider. She frowned, contemplating possible destinations, and subconsciously opened her fingers, counting the limited options one by one. I heard that the city of Suramar is now tightly closed by a barrier and has become an indestructible fortress, making it difficult for outsiders to enter, she said, ruling out the first option. Then, she continued her analysis. Sandala is located in the far north. The severe cold there is unbearable for those of us who live in warm areas. It is impossible for us to adapt to that environment in a short time. She looked at her husband. Senlalore is currently being besieged by the Burning Legion's partial divisions. The war is raging. Compared to Zin Aislinn, the situation there is even more dire. The safety level is not much higher. Celeber answered before Dathramar could speak. As an active moonguard, Celeber was quite familiar with the outside world. That's such a pity. I quite like Senlai Luo'er. Mrs. Sunchaser sighed, reluctantly giving up another option. Lasalraza is a typical temple city, not suitable for the upper elves to live in. Only Elrathalas, which has always remained secretive, has a chance. Do we have to go south to Sindra? Celeber suggested. Actually, Salazar can't do it either, Celeber continued. Lasalraza is a city with a temple at its core. The living atmosphere there is incompatible with us and is not suitable for us upper elves to live in for a long time. Mrs. Sunchaser explained. After all, only Arisa, who has always remained secretive, has a chance to reach Wrath. But do we really want to go south to the Sindra area? Dathramar shook his head. Sindra is not a viable option. The Lord of Erthalis Torsidron has not made a clear stance between the Burning Legion and the Resistance. They obviously want to remain neutral. In this case, they are unlikely to accept us. Then what should we do? Mrs. Sunchaser asked anxiously. We can't let Elise resist. No, it should be said to be the rebel camp now, right? The life there is too difficult. How can a girl stand it? Dathramar smiled slightly, turned his head, and his eyes fell on the fifth person in the room, or rather, the crow. The crow had been standing quietly on Ellie's shoulder, silently observing the family meeting. Perhaps regarding the issue of the new home, we can listen to the advice of Alice's good friend, he said slowly. Chapter 738, The Plan Begins. Alice followed her father's gaze and looked at the crow in surprise, then turned to him, puzzled. Good friend, are you talking about Xiao Hai? She shook her head vigorously. Dad, are you kidding? Although Xiao Hai is very spiritual, he is only a bird after all. How can he answer such a question? Are you sure? Dathrima looked at his daughter with an intriguing smile. How about you take a closer look? Well, just as Alice was about to observe the crow, Xiao Hai again, she suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice sigh softly. She turned her head in shock and saw the crow that had been perched on her shoulder flutter its wings and fly directly in front of her. Then, the bird suddenly grew in size and transformed into the image of a night elf before everyone. Chiang! The sound of a dagger being unsheathed crisply broke the quiet atmosphere of the night. Kelly, the active moon guard and proud eldest son of Dathrima, reacted with lightning speed. He instantly pulled out a dagger shining with cold light from his waist. The entire movement was smooth and fast, as if it had been practiced thousands of times. In an almost instinctive alert posture, he lowered his center of gravity, his eyes as bright as torches, staring closely at the uninvited guest who had suddenly appeared, ready for any threat. Compared to her brother, Alice seemed a bit slow. She stood next to her brother, looking at Ethan in confusion. As a daughter of nobility, she had lived in an ivory tower since childhood and knew little about the complexities and dangers of the outside world. In her limited knowledge, she lacked understanding of druids, a profession usually chosen by commoners. Therefore, the concept of wilderness transformation was completely unfamiliar to her. At this moment, she still didn't understand the situation. Seeing this, Ethan sighed and tried to sound calm and harmless. Please don't be nervous, Mr. Kelly. I am not an enemy. Under the circumstances, Ethan hadn't expected Dathrima to reveal his existence directly. He could only try to calm the sudden tension and show his goodwill as much as possible. In fact, Mr. Dathrima has already known about my existence. He's right, Dathrima nodded. Ethan had already revealed his identity to me before I went on my mission. In fact, he is not only a member of the rebel army, but also a representative of the rebels who infiltrated Aislinn. The reason I wanted to bring order to the chaos was precisely because of his careful planning and promotion. His words dispelled the doubts in the minds of his wife and children, and they finally felt relieved. Ethan, are you Ethan Kwai? Kelly's eyes suddenly lit up, as if he had captured some important information, and he became excited. You are the druid who became famous among the rebels? I have heard of your name before. Legend has it that you once transformed into a blazing firebird and single-handedly saved the entire Dragon Legion in a battle with the Black Dragon King. Is this true? It seemed that Ethan's reputation as a strong man had indeed influenced many people. Ethan nodded slightly, confirming his identity. Mrs. Sunstrider couldn't help but come closer. The vigilance in her eyes had dissipated, replaced by respect and curiosity for Ethan, the war hero. Her eyes wandered over him, as if she wanted to see into his heart. Sure enough, heroes come. From a young age, Mrs. Sunchaser sighed sincerely. With a strong man like Mr. Ethan as our ally, the Sunchaser family's confidence in joining the resistance has increased. Compared to the warmth and friendliness of her family, Alalace's reaction, as Ethan's previous owner, was much more genuine. The little girl's expression was initially confused, then transformed into incredible surprise. Shyness spread across her cheeks, and she covered her face to avoid Ethan's gaze. It seemed she had finally realized that the little pet she had always treated as an emotional outlet was actually a living person. This shocking discovery put her in an embarrassing situation. She had once confided all her little secrets to Xiao Hai without reservation, even changing her clothes and doing many private things in front of him. Looking back now, these secrets were no longer secrets, but fully exposed to Ethan. For a while, Ethan didn't know how to handle this embarrassment. It seemed he could only leave it to time. Okay, let's get back to the topic. Ethan clapped his hands gently, bringing everyone's attention back to the meeting. I can provide you with information about the resettlement of your Sunchaser family after they evacuate Aislinn. I have some preliminary ideas, but the final decision-making power is still in your hands. He pointed to the east side of Zin Isolin on the map. Black Crow Castle was initially just a military fortress, but now it has become the core stronghold of the resistance. It has gathered high-class elves from all directions who are determined to fight against the devil, Ethan explained. Since your Sunstrider family has decided to join the resistance, seeking refuge in Black Crow Castle is naturally the best choice. I promise you that no matter how the situation changes, it will always be your safe haven. In Ethan's eyes, Dathramar was worthy of being the future founding king of the High Elves. His extraordinary foresight, insight into the situation, and decisiveness were truly admirable. The city of Zin Isolin seemed peaceful, but all this was just rootless duckweed because this city sat on the source of all chaos, the Well of Eternity, which would undoubtedly put it at the center of the storm. To expel those demons from the continent of Azeroth again, destroying the well became the only feasible strategy. However, once the Well of Eternity exploded, the catastrophic consequences would be unimaginable, and the city would sink to the bottom of the sea forever with great changes. This was what happened in the original history. Without any knowledge of this background, Dathramar's decision to plan the transfer of the family industry in advance was undoubtedly very wise. Black Crow Castle, right? Dathramar nodded slowly, seemingly deep in thought. When Ethan saw this, his heart moved, and he immediately understood the other party's intention of revealing his identity in this situation. This was seeking a clear commitment. Dathramar was indeed a veteran noble, knowing how to win the trust of others. Sending his beloved daughter to the base camp of the resistance was undoubtedly the highest level of trust, almost equivalent to actively handing over hostages. Ethan also understood that such trust needed to be responded to with equal sincerity. He solemnly promised, "Mr. Dathramar, please rest assured. As long as we can successfully save Tyrande this time, I will personally escort Allilace to Black Crow Castle and ensure that no one will bully her." As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and added, "Moreover, when we arrive at Black Crow Castle, Allilace's education will never fall behind. Although we lack top mages here, we have many high-level priests and druids. If Allilace is interested in these two fields, I am willing to personally introduce excellent mentors to her. Their level is no less than that of the best mages." Malfurion or Tyrande, what do you think of this arrangement? Ethan's answer made Dathrima smile with satisfaction. The agreement between the two parties was successfully reached, and the Yin family was very happy. There was only one exception. When the little girl heard that she would continue to study after leaving Isolin, her little mouth couldn't help but pout, clearly unhappy with the news. But how could the affairs of the family and the country be determined by the wishes of a little girl like her? After Ethan reached an agreement with the Sunchaser family, the entire Sunchaser family became busy. They began to sort out their property secretly and quietly sold some valuable items. At the same time, they looked for opportunities for their trusted Asso, C8s to smuggle gold, silver, precious books, and magic items out of the city, beginning the transfer of assets. With the credentials provided by Ethan, Jury's cronies easily made contact with the rebels and successfully sent the property away. Dathrema also wisely donated part of the property to the resistance forces as a sign of friendship. Following this, Dathrema and his wife began to frequently attend noble banquets. They used the promise of the rebels as their endorsement to try to win over more like-minded upper-class elves who were willing to join the rebels, thereby strengthening the rebel cause. In a different part of the city, the demon hunter Illidan accidentally encountered a moon guard with fluttering blonde hair. The guard inexplicably thrust a letter into Illidan's hands and then left in a hurry. Illidan opened the envelope in confusion, and the moment he glanced at the letter, his expression changed dramatically, becoming extremely complicated. After reading the letter over and over, Illidan lit the paper on fire and watched it turn to ashes in the flames. A trace of determination flashed in his eyes, as if he had made an important decision. In the days that followed, Illidan's subordinates noticed something strange about their boss. Illidan, who was originally bored, became even more taciturn. His brows were furrowed all day long, as if he was worried about something. He also became absent-minded about the tasks assigned by the devil, often absent from work for no reason, and no one knew where he went or what he was doing. At the same time, Alice also took action. Her sedan chair frequently shuttled through the aristocratic area, and even occasionally came close to the palace. It was a pity that no one noticed that whenever her sedan chair passed by, there would often be one or more berries or acorns left in a corner where no one noticed. Chapter 739, Serial Explosion Attacks. A week after the Sunchaser family officially decided to join the rebels unexpectedly launched a thunderous offensive. Not only did all the mortal warriors come out in full force, but even the demigods also took to the battlefield, actively participating in the battle. It seemed they intended to launch a strong attack, aiming to suddenly break through the strong defense line in front of Aislinn, while the devil's foothold was still unstable. The rebels' plan was almost successful. If Archimonde had not responded in time and expended immense power to quickly teleport a large number of demons to the battlefield, the resistance army might have advanced to the gates of Aislinn by now. However, to resist this fierce attack, Archimonde not only dispatched a large number of troops, but also went to the battlefield in person, vowing to crush the rebels' offensive. Of course, this kind of turmoil meant little to the upper elves huddled in Aislinn. The disputes and wars in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with them. This was not the first time the Burning Legion had launched a large-scale attack. They had become accustomed to the turmoil outside. No matter how fierce the fighting was, their lives remained the same, filled with luxury and leisure. The flames of war and gunpowder smoke could not affect their opulent lifestyle. However, this time, they couldn't have been more wrong. The shadow of war finally enveloped them. On the third day of the war, something suddenly happened in Aislinn City. A deafening explosion erupted from a luxurious mansion in the aristocratic district. A prominent upper elf noble and his only heir died in the explosion. Immediately afterward, explosions occurred one after another, constantly ringing in every corner of the city. These explosions had one thing in common. They mostly occurred in aristocratic areas. Countless highborn elves and their servants were killed or injured in the explosions, and howls and cries could be heard throughout the gardens. To make matters worse, the explosions ignited raging fires. Those splendid mansions were reduced to ashes in the sea of flames, and countless precious properties and works of art were burned. The most unfortunate was the Sunchaser family. This ancient family suffered an unprecedented blow. Most of their mansion was devoured by fire, and their poor little daughter was not spared, buried in the inferno. If the initial explosion could be regarded as an unfortunate accident, the subsequent roars made it clear to even the most foolish that this was no accident but a well-planned attack. The target of this attack was the highborn elves, who thought they had nothing to worry about. Queen Ashara was shocked and reacted quickly. To deal with the situation, she urgently dispatched the elite Queen's Guards, and even her trusted maid, Vashj, personally took action. At the same time, the Moon Guards were given the important task of rushing to the noble area to put out the raging fires. They also aimed to uncover the true story behind these events and reveal the mastermind behind the attacks. However, at this dangerous moment, Queen Ashara did not let the demonic forces intervene. She was well aware of the ferocious nature of demons, and coupled with the mutual suspicion between herself and Archimonde, the demon army was left in the Well of Eternity. As for Queen Ashara herself, since Archimonde had gone to war, she had to guard the Well of Eternity. Among the coalition forces of the Burning Legion and the Upper Elves, there were only a few strong enough to stand alongside Archimonde, and she was one of them. Therefore, as the only two top powerhouses in the Burning Legion and the Highborn Alliance, at least one of them had to stay to ensure the safety of the Well of Eternity. The noise from the serial explosions was overwhelming, and Tyran could vaguely sense the commotion and changes outside her prison cell. She was filled with doubts and worries, but being behind bars, she couldn't get any exact news from the outside world. Elun's protection still enveloped her, keeping enemies at bay, but this protection only went so far. Ethan and Dathramar had not been seen since their last brief visit. The priestess seemed isolated on an island, knowing nothing about the changes in the outside world. As the number of noble families affected by the disaster continued to increase, the city of Iceland descended into chaos. Since she could not rely on the power of demons, the queen had to call the palace guards to deal with these problems. This directly led to the palace's guard force being severely weakened, and even the original guards outside the cell door were transferred. Vasht believed that under the current situation, it was a waste of resources to continue to guard a priestess who had nowhere to escape. Tyrande was speechless at such a decision because she indeed posed no substantial threat to the palace. Suddenly, rapid footsteps echoed from outside the door, breaking the silence in the prison. Tyrande immediately became alert. This was not the time for food and water delivery, and since eating the food sent by Ethan that time, she had decided to go on a hunger strike to protest her imprisonment. At this moment, she couldn't help but begin to guess what the sudden footsteps meant. The cell door opened quietly, letting in light from the outside through a small crack, and then opened completely. Tyrande's eyes widened in surprise as she saw that the person entering was Dathramar. Although he was masked, his iconic blonde hair still shone brightly in the dark prison, betraying his identity. Behind him, a similarly masked female high elf stood quietly. Dathramar cautiously scanned the inside of the cell, his eyes lingering on Tyrande for a moment before quickly retreating to the corridor behind the door, as if avoiding something. "Dathramar, why are you here?" Tyrande shouted in shock, but her voice was interrupted by Dathramar's hurried gesture. "Shh, Tyrande, speak softly." He looked around nervously, as if there were countless demon guards lurking in the cell. After confirming that there was no one else in the cell, he carefully walked to where Tyrande was held. Dathramar took out a mysterious rune from his robe, which emitted a faint light. He gently brought the rune close to the barrier, an action that confused Tyrande. "Be prepared," Dathramar whispered. Immediately afterward, he seemed to activate the runes in his hands. A bright green light burst out from the runes and shot directly towards the barrier in front of him. The barrier did not react under the green light, but in the next moment, it suddenly disappeared without a trace, and the device that generated the barrier was instantly reduced to ashes. Is this power so powerful? Dathramar couldn't help but feel surprised when he witnessed this scene. Even though he created this miracle himself, he still couldn't believe it. Due to being imprisoned for a long time, Tyrande's body was a little stiff, and when the cell door was suddenly opened, she almost fell to the ground. The female high elf next to Dathramar had quick reflexes and supported her, using her strength to help Tyrande stand up steadily. Tyrande looked curiously at the female elf who was supporting her, and then turned to look at Dathramar. Dathramar noticed her doubtful gaze, glanced down at the dim rune in his hand, and then explained, "This is the mysterious rune that Ethan gave me. He called this magic, the Great Disintegration Technique, claiming that it can lift the prison barrier. I was skeptical at first, but now it seems that he was really not lying. It is unbelievable. I don't know where he got such a powerful magic item." Dathramar. He would never have thought that Ethan Quaye, the druid he regarded as extremely powerful, was actually more knowledgeable in arcane magic than druidry. And this one-time rune is a masterpiece made by Ethan himself. "So, are you here to rescue me?" Tyrande's voice trembled, and she could feel her heartbeat suddenly speeding. But where is Ethan? I'm not lying to you." Dathramar stared into her eyes, understanding her concern. This careful plan was orchestrated by Ethan Quaye. The reason he didn't come in person is because he is causing chaos outside to distract the palace guards. After hearing this, a trace of hesitation flashed in Tyrande's eyes, and she was dubious about Dathramar's words. Dathramar shook his head slightly. To dispel her worries, he took out a crimson feather from his pocket. The feather glowed with fire and contained the power of a candle's heat. Tyrande recognized the origin of this feather at a glance. It was a phoenix feather. So far, the only phoenix that has appeared in Azeroth is the one transformed by Ethan. In other words, this is a treasure that only Ethan could provide. "This is a token that Ethan personally gave to me," Dathramar reminded her. Seeing this, You should be able to believe me completely. Miss Tarand, time is urgent and we cannot hesitate. We must leave quickly before the guards return. Our companions are already waiting for us anxiously below in Mali. Is there anyone else involved? Tarand's eyes suddenly widened with surprise and curiosity. She was amazed at the scale of Ethan's plan. Of course, we are not fighting alone, Dathrima nodded solemnly. To ensure that our operations proceed smoothly and avoid being intercepted by demons or guards midway, we have gathered many powerful companions. After hearing this, a warm current surged in Tarand's heart, and she prayed in a low voice, Elune, the phoenix and moon goddess, bless each of you brave souls. Then, she couldn't help but ask worriedly, but what about the guards? Won't they discover our actions? They are now busy dealing with the chaos created by Ethan, which provides us with an opportunity to escape, Dathrima explained, with a hint of urgency in his tone. But this situation will not last long. We must act immediately. Stop hesitating, Miss Tarand. Come with me. Nash chapter 740. Rushing out of the palace. Dathramar and his companions carefully led Tarand out of the dark prison and into the dimly lit corridor. There, a third masked night elf waited silently. Tarande hesitated at first, but as she realized she had stepped out of the prison cell, an inexplicable excitement surged within her. Dathramar noticed her hesitation, glanced at her with dissatisfaction, and urged her to move on. Under the guidance of Dathramar's companions, the four of them quickly crossed the corridor and embarked on a long and steep staircase. Along the way, they found no trace of any guards, which made Tarand realize that the chaos caused by Ethan was far more intense than she had imagined. The absence of guards in the palace was highly unusual. At the end of the stairs, a heavy iron door came into view. Ashara's angelic face was carved in the center of the door, her eyes seemingly staring at everyone who passed by. When Tyron saw this face, her body trembled involuntarily. This reaction aroused the sympathy of the two upper elves. Going through this door leads to the hall, Dathrimar explained promptly. From the hall, we can directly reach the stables. Others should have prepared our mounts and are just waiting for us. When the palace gate opens, as long as no one stops us, we can take you out. Dathrimar straightened his back proudly, a confident light in his eyes. Don't forget, we are the upper elves. We are the most outstanding mages in the world. The power we possess is enough to overcome any obstacle. I feel that the road ahead is still clear, the third night elf mage suddenly interjected, an arrogant smile on his face. Vashti's group of trash are still under our control of the sensory control system, but I'm worried that the control of magic may not last long, Dathramar said softly, cautiously pushing open the heavy door. The hall behind the door was empty, and no ferocious-looking warriors appeared as expected. The night elf mage's confidence grew. The stables are close at hand, he declared proudly. Look, Dathramar, you don't need to be afraid of these incompetent people. However, before he could finish his sentence, a sharp arrow suddenly penetrated his neck. Blood poured out, staining the clothes of Tyrande and Dathramar. The mage fell heavily to the ground, the light of life quickly dimming. Several guards appeared at the end of the corridor, their eyes cold and wolf-like, looking in Tyrande's direction. Don't move. Everyone stand still, a junior officer wearing a dark purple helmet ordered sharply. A trace of anger flashed in Dathramar's eyes. He waved his hand violently, aiming his palm at the guards. Magic explosion technique, he shouted. In an instant, a powerful invisible force field energy burst out from Dathramar, violently impacting the guards. They were thrown against the wall helplessly, like leaves blown by a strong wind. The sound of the impact echoed in the hall, dull and loud. This is the fate of those who dare to attack the upper elf elites, he said sternly. Tyrande frowned and reminded him with the sharp intuition of a priestess, such noise may attract unnecessary attention. Only then did Dathramar realize that his attack might have been too violent. He frowned slightly and turned to signal to the female companion beside him. The two of them moved left and right in tacit agreement, pulling Tyrande forward quickly. They walked through the corridor and quickly arrived at the stables. There, 2 or 3 upper-class elves were waiting quietly, their faces covered with silk scarves, revealing only a pair of alert eyes. Why haven't you seen me? A woman was about to ask about the situation, But when she saw Dathramar's tense face and the sadness in his eyes, she fell silent. That she couldn't hide in time, she immediately closed her eyes, knowing in her heart that the companion who had not returned might have met a misfortune. We just heard the sound of fighting and the fluctuation of magic above. Another man broke the silence, speaking in a deep voice. Even we felt that someone was using magic. The palace guards must have noticed something abnormal. There was an attack at that time, and we had no choice, Dathrama nodded. He looked around and made a quick decision. We can only act as quickly as possible. Jared, where is the mount you prepared for this priestess? It's ready, a voice came from the shadows. I picked the fastest lightsaber for her. Okay, the mage took a deep breath, turned to Tyrande, and said sincerely, Miss Tyrande, now you have seen with your own eyes that the Sunstrider family is not the only highborn elves who pursue justice. When you return to the rebel army, we hope you can speak fairly on our behalf. We know that they may have misunderstandings and hostility towards us. We want them to obey our orders and follow our arrangements, an enthusiastic highborn woman shouted loudly, her eyes flashing with excitement. We have the power, the ability, and the responsibility to do so. If you think that way, then we are doomed, Dathrama suddenly shouted at the woman. If the rebels know that you have such an attitude, then all of us will be in danger. Dathrama's words made her shrink back and shut her mouth obediently. Then, Dathrama quickly turned to Tyrande with a hint of apology in his eyes. Are you willing to take on this important task for us? No problem. I will never look back. Tyrande replied without hesitation. I swear in the name of the moon goddess Elune, I will do my best to accomplish it. If Tyrande had reservations about the other highborn elves gathered here, she was very satisfied with Dathrama. She thought to herself that Ethan chose the Sunchaser family as his first partner, which was a really smart move. Even if these upper-class elves decide to join the resistance camp, their arrogance is indelible. Among so many people, only Dathrama could maintain a rare humility. He knew very well who was seeking help in this cooperation. However, Tyrande decided to put aside her prejudices against these arrogant highborn elves. After all, they risked their lives to rescue her, and this friendship could not be ignored. What's more, at critical moments, Dathrama's decision-making power could make everyone obey his command with sincerity. As long as this kind of leadership is maintained, working with them may be a feasible option. That's great. With your promise, High Priestess, I feel deeply reassured, Dathrama said excitedly. He quickly pointed to the vigorous lightsaber in the stable. Quick, we have to hurry up and get on your mounts. Every minute counts. A mage brought a female leopard with silky smooth hair and a light body, handing the reins to Tyrande. There was a heavy long sword hanging on the side of this lightsaber, obviously a trophy obtained from Vashja's soldiers. Tyrande nodded to this carefully prepared gift, expressing her gratitude, and then lightly mounted her mount, waiting for the order to set off. Dathrama looked around and made sure everyone was ready. Then he pointed to the two huge wooden doors leading to freedom and said in a sonorous and powerful voice, We must unite as one and break through this door together. No one must be left behind. We have no time to take care of those who are alone. Although most demons have been transferred to the front line, the road ahead is still full of unknown dangers. He straightened his chest, his voice full of faith and determination. But please remember, we are the upper elves, the top mages in the world. We carry the endless energy given by the Well of Eternity. Today, we are going to use this strength to open up a road to the outside of the city. Anyone who dares to block our progress will face our wrath. Tyrande's face remained expressionless, but her heart was slightly moved. She quietly prayed to the moon goddess Elune, seeking guidance to help her stand side by side with her new companions in battle. Although these highborn had once conspired to bring the Burning Legion to Kalimdor, they now fought hard to atone for their sins. Tyrande was determined to do her best to win understanding and acceptance for them. Dathrama pointed at the closed door in front of him and commanded, Open the door. Following his order, a fireball shot out. The next moment, the two palace doors exploded with a deafening noise that echoed through the empty courtyard. Go forward bravely and charge! Dathrema waved his arms and led the team forward. Tyrande followed closely behind, urging her lightsaber to gallop after him. The Highborn, at the front of the team, rode powerful lightsabers, passing through the shattered gate like arrows. Their mounts leaped gracefully over the remains of the gate and landed steadily on the road ahead. The Queen and the remaining demons should still be gathered near the Well of Eternity, Dathrema shouted, providing crucial information to the team. Most of the palace guards have been transferred to the noble area. This is our chance to break through the siege and succeed.